Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Development Committee. My name is Councillor Jim Park and I chair this committee. The Local Government Act 2020 enables Council to hold virtual meetings with councillors participating remotely by electronic communication. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the Council website to enable public viewing of the proceedings, including councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website soon after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered by the committee, then the meeting will be adjourned until resolution. However, Council is not responsible for any technical difficulties that may be experienced by a member of the community in participating remotely in this meeting. Once the meeting commences, only limited assistance can be provided. I acknowledge that all councillors are present and on screen for tonight's meeting. There are also a number of officers in attendance tonight who will be introduced when presenting their reports. The purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. The committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. Councillors are familiar with the reports, which include a summary of the objections received. Tonight, we will be facilitating public submissions by electronic communication to hear from members of the community or applicants. I will call on you individually when it is time to make your submission, and you'll be placed into the meeting to present your submission. When making your submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said, and keep your submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. Importantly, focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. If you are opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why and suggest an alternative approach which would satisfy your concerns. There is a strict time limit of 3 minutes for each submitter. Whilst as chairperson I reserve the right to vary that time, I seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will announce that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude. Moving now to the order of business. Apologies. Mr Thompson, are there any apologies?
Through you, Mr Chair, there are no apologies for this evening.
Thank you. That takes me to item 1, adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on 4 October 2021. Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Galt seconding the minutes that have been circulated. Is there any discussion? And I put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 2, declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any such declarations? No. Item 3, presentation of officer reports. Item 3.1, preliminary consultation outcomes, 32 Corby Street, Balwyn North, and that will be presented by Christian Romson, Team Leader of Strategic Planning.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and through you. Councillors, the report in front of you tonight relates to a proposed heritage overlay for a property at 32 Corby Street in Balwyn North. The property was originally identified as part of the Balwyn and Balwyn North Heritage Study in 2014 and formed part of the peer review stage 3 process. Through that process, the property was identified for a detailed heritage assessment, even though that assessment hadn't been carried out when the study was prepared in 2012 to 2014. In April 2021 of this year, Council received an application for a Section 29A demolition application for the property. In response to that application, Council asked its heritage consultant to undertake a detailed assessment of the property. And the assessment was undertaken by Context, who determined that the site was of individual heritage significance, meeting 2 criteria, criteria D for representativeness and criterion E for aesthetic significance. Based on that recommendation and the heritage assessment, officers suspended the application for demolition and lodged an interim HO request with the Minister for Planning. The Minister has yet to make a decision on that application. In response to the interim request, the previous owner's legal representation requested that council engage another heritage consultant to undertake a new assessment of the property. So officers engaged a second heritage consultant, Build Heritage Proprietary Limited, who also undertook a detailed assessment. That assessment came to the conclusion that the property was worthy of heritage significance, but for different reasons. Rather than criterion D and E, the consultant argued that the property was of significance based on criterion E and H. Following that assessment, council officers undertook preliminary consultation on the draft heritage citation prepared by Build Heritage. That preliminary consultation was undertaken between the 16th of August and the 13th of September. And the report tonight presents you with the outcomes and the feedback that we've received. In response to the preliminary consultation, council received 3 supporting submissions and 7 opposing submissions. Summary and response to these submissions is contained in the attachment to the report in detail. The key issues that I'll just highlight for you tonight in the objecting submissions were objecting on the grounds that the place is not livable, the house is not representative of Alistair Knox architecture, it doesn't meet the threshold for local significance, the association with Alistair Knox is not sufficient enough, and there are character issues and a number of other issues such as intactness, property value, and other cultural considerations. Council's heritage consultant and officers have reviewed all the feedback received, but are not recommending any changes to the citation or indeed the recommendation to proceed to the amendment stage. Now, councils also would like to just draw your attention to the 2 structural engineering reports which have been submitted by the owner following the finalisation of the officer report in front of you. That's why they are not mentioned in the report. Both those reports argue that the building has significant structural damage and would require substantial investment to rectify the building's structural deficiencies. I'm not here to dispute the advice by 2 expert engineers, but just noting that structural integrity of a building is not something that is a relevant consideration when determining whether a property has heritage value or not, and whether heritage overlay should be applied or not. Structural integrity can be considered, and is most appropriately considered, as part of any future planning permit application when it's lodged. Council's local heritage policy at 2203 provides guidance around under what circumstances the structural integrity might be justified to issue a planning permit for a demolition, but that is for a future process. So based on the feedback that we've received, officers recommend that the UPDC adopt the heritage citation and seek authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment for permanent heritage overlay. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you. I understand that we have 3 submitters, although evidently one of them isn't online. So we might start with Dr. Sanjeev Vij to perhaps give us some clarification as to how many speakers there will be on his behalf.
Hi, Councillor Jim Park. How are you?
I'm good. I'm well, thank you. I'd just like to clarify with you, we had been told that you were asking Louise Hicks of Council to address us. Is that still happening?
Louise is in.
She should be in now. She was having some difficulty in getting through the WebEx app, but I think she just told us she's in there.
She's in. I can hear.
Okay. So then the question arises whether you are to each avail yourself of 3 minutes. There was a suggestion in your emails that you wanted to do something different from that. And to that end, I've indicated that either your barrister can utilise 5 minutes if she's the sole presenter on your behalf, or alternatively, you can each have 3 minutes. So which of those two options would you like to pursue?
Ideally, the barrister for 5 minutes. And if there is any question that needs to be answered, where I can be of help as well in terms of replying to the concerns, I'm here as well.
All right. Well, we won't call on you unless that becomes necessary. And so that will be on the basis that the sole presenter on behalf of you and your wife will be Ms. Hicks. That's your clear understanding of that, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Hicks, you're online? Ms. Hicks?
Yes,
are you-
councillors, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All
So,
right, excellent.
the position is that you'll be the sole presenter on behalf of the
Yes,
Bidge
I
family, and you'll be allowed 5 minutes.
yes,
And I'll let you know when you've reached the 4.5 minute mark in the event that you're still talking. If you could start your presentation with your name and also your address of chambers, please.
yes, thank you, councillors, and I'm sorry about all of the gefuddling. I thought Zoom was bad. Okay, my name is Louise Hicks. I'm a barrister. My chambers are at level 11 of 460 Lonsdale Street in Melbourne, known as Caston Chambers.
Okay, now I'm just going to stop you there. We've got a fairly ordinary connection. Is that your experience as well? All right, we'll just see how we go. You were dropping in and out on my connection, but let's see how we go. So thank you. If you'd like to commence.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, councillors, and thank you for the time that you have afforded my clients tonight. So Jane and Sanjeev are very concerned about the placement of a heritage overlay over their property at 32 Corby Street in Baldwin North. Their concern is supported by 2 reports now, and I understand that councillors have both of those documents. Initially, we sought some advice from Mr. Rayworth, and we asked Mr. Rayworth what his thoughts were about the local threshold having been met. And we sought Mr. Rayworth's advice because we were confused by the history of the heritage assessment of this particular property. It would be fair to say that this property was never near the top of anybody's lists, in fact was way down the bottom of any list that it appeared on. And at times over the last 5 to 7 years has disappeared off lists, has been the subject of differing criteria, context forming one view and Mr. Simon Reeves forming another. So we were just completely confused by what was going on here. And so Mr. Rayworth gave his view, and his view was that the property did not meet that local threshold, which is the starting point for considering whether a heritage overlay ought be placed upon the property. Now, Mr. Bryce Rayworth, as you would be aware, is a preeminent expert in this field, but we didn't rest there. We also went to Claire Miller of Trethowan, again a very reputable heritage consultant, and asked for her view, get a second opinion. And similarly, her view is that that initial question, does this property meet the local threshold? The answer was absolutely not. And there's a consideration of both criteria that Mr. Reeves has adopted rather than those that Context had previously put forward. So we say that's the starting point. The local significance, the heritage significance is not met. There's also the critical issue of the structural integrity of the property. The initial submission that my client has sent in some weeks ago goes into this in some detail about the lack of the heritage word intactness or integrity of the property. But again, we just didn't rest on our concern or our view. We've gone out, we've sought and we've obtained 2 structural reports that both say this has got to be demolished. It's not structurally sound. So in those circumstances where you have neither the local threshold being met in the opinion of two preeminent heritage advisors, where you've had this shifting position on, are we going to look at this property at all? Yeah, well, we might. Oh, no, let's leave it for a bit. Let's go back to it. Different criteria for context to Mr. Reeves. And then we have the structural report that says, from a heritage perspective, what are we seeking to preserve? This property isn't safe to be lived in. And that's not just a structural question. My clients have got grave concerns for their health, the amount of mold in the property that is partly a structural issue, but more than that, is also of critical concern for them. So we say from the time of 2015, when this property first made the third appendices, the bottom list for perhaps further consideration, the only thing that's changed since 2015 from a heritage perspective is that the position of the property in terms of structural integrity has become worse. So we say to you, in all of these circumstances, prefer the opinion of Mr. Rayworth and Ms. Miller. That opinion is entirely independent. It doesn't consider the structural issues, which we say is an additional matter that is critical to your thinking. And in closing, we say that in all the circumstances of this particular property, when one gets through, after many years, the scraping of the bottom of the barrel after gap study after gap study, the difficulty is that the importance of the heritage overlay gets diluted. What we can go to the community and say, we're preserving this, it meets the local threshold, it has that structural integrity, to say that we have something left to protect is so diluted as to impact upon the integrity of the heritage overlay approach of council generally. We note that the Minister has refused an interim protection, and we say in these circumstances, the time now is to say that this property has been evaluated by Mr. Reeves, but
Start to wrap up.
Yes, that is my final sentence, sir. And in all these circumstances, we urge upon you to bring this to an end. It is a source of considerable stress to my clients.
Thank you. I'll just see if there's any questions from councillors. There's one from Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you for the information. I just wanted to clarify the second assessment from Miss Miller. Have
Yes.
we got that?
I'd hope that you would have it. It is more recent, Councillor, and so we will certainly have that provided to you.
I sent that on Saturday.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I thought that you had. So, Councillor, we'll make sure that you have that before a final decision is made.
Thanks, Miss Hicks. I can look it up if it was on Saturday. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions. No, so thank you for your presentation, Ms. Hicks.
My pleasure, councillors.
Now, Mr. Williamson, matters arising, if any?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through just a couple of points. Firstly, with regards to that assessment or memo from Trethowan Architecture, which is dated the 15th of October. We have not had the opportunity to review that or to have that considered by Simon Reeves of Built Heritage, who's prepared the citation. So I can't comment on what that says. I'm looking at it right now, and it's just a short two-pager. I'd like to comment in relation to that it's not uncommon for varying opinions to be expressed with regards to heritage properties. The fact that context and Built Heritage have identified different criteria doesn't necessarily mean that the property is not of heritage significance or that there's confusion. We also have an opinion from Bryce Rayworth that the property is not of significance. That is not unusual. We believe that with his expertise in post-war architecture, Simon Reeves is just as qualified, if not more qualified than Bryce Rayworth, to make assessments and undertake assessments of post-war properties. and the planning scheme amendment process and the panel process are the most appropriate time for those different opinions to be tested against each other. And there's an opportunity for the owner's representative to cross-examine Simon Reeves, as will council have the opportunity, and council's representative will have the opportunity to cross-examine any heritage expert they might call for that meeting. So those are not matters that draw a simple conclusion that the property is not of heritage significance. Ms. Hicks also said that the minister has refused an interim protection and therefore the matter has been tested. That's not correct. The minister has yet to decide council's request for interim heritage overlay protection. So the matter has not been settled on that front. Certainly, if the minister had refused that, we would have had to issue consent for the demolition, and the building most likely probably wouldn't be there today anymore. So that's certainly not the case. I also just wanted to pick up on two more points. There was a point made about the structural reports making statements about the heritage value. That's also not the case. The structural engineering reports, there is no expertise and no expert opinion offered in those reports on the heritage significance of the property. Structural engineers wouldn't be qualified to make such a statement, and if something like that were to be presented at a panel hearing as an expert evidence, there wouldn't be much weight afforded to that, because that's what heritage consultants and heritage experts are there for, not structural engineers. And also, just lastly, the point about the property being way down on the bottom of the pile or the barrel. I can't remember what the wording was exactly. The fact that the property wasn't one of the priority sites in the 2015 study, that doesn't mean that the site wasn't of significance. Priorities had to be drawn at the time as to which properties actually are assessed in detail. Yes, this property wasn't assessed as part of that process based on the scoring that was applied. That didn't mean and doesn't mean that the property is not of significance. No detailed assessment of the property was undertaken at the time. That assessment has now been undertaken, and the recommendation is for the site to go into the heritage overlay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilmson, just wanted to ask you, if the Minister approves the interim heritage control, what recourse does the applicant have? And as a follow-up question that you may wish to consider at the same time, if the Minister does not approve the interim control, what recourse or what course of action does the applicant have to take?
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. And through you, Mr. Chair. So, two scenarios. The Minister for Planning approves the interim heritage overlay. Council has to, or we will refuse the Section 29A application, and the owners will have to go and apply for a planning permit for the demolition of the property. That'll be a planning permit assessment that's undertaken as per usual. Should the decision by council be at that point to refuse the demolition application, then the owner can appeal that decision to VCAT and have the matter considered by VCAT. Should council decide to issue a planning permit for the demolition, then they can go and get their building permit for the demolition and the Section 29A consent and demolish the building. If the Minister refuses council's request for interim protection, then we will need to consent to the demolition application, and the owners can go and get a building permit and demolish the building.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. I have a question and also foreshadow a motion on this particular item on the agenda tonight.
Noted.
With regard to the notion of heritage protection and of a building that is, we've had these two engineering reports indicate is structurally unsound. I just want you to clarify my understanding of the process involved to see whether I have this correct or not. So should the Minister, should an amendment be prepared and accepted by the Minister for Heritage Protection, does the applicant have the opportunity when they apply for a subsequent planning permit to do alterations to the building, to then also bring up the issues regarding structural integrity. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if the site is included in a heritage overlay, whether that is an interim heritage overlay or permanent heritage overlay, that doesn't matter. Planning permit will be required for demolition, and a planning permit will be required for any external alterations to the building. As part of that process, whatever is being applied for, in this case, it would be demolition of the building because they're not proposing any other alterations. Then council would have to assess that application against the local heritage policy, which contains provisions with regards to under what circumstances demolition and the structural integrity of the building might be considered a strong enough grounds to issue a planning permit for the demolition.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Williamson. A number of notable architects in Australia have got foundations in their name that preserve some of their history and their heritage. Two questions in this. First one, have we communicated with the Alistair Knox Foundation? And as a follow-up to that, are they seeking its preservation?
So the answer to the first one is yes. They were notified in writing as well as part of the preliminary consultation process, but we did not receive feedback from them.
Just a follow-up, Chair, did we actually seek any detailed information, or so they're aware that we're going through a heritage process for protection?
Yes, so they received a letter to advise them that the draft citation is out on consultation and that we're welcoming any feedback or information that anyone might have, but they did not respond to that request.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson.
Councillor, is there any? Yes, Councillor Franco.
Thank you. To Mr. Williamson, why did I note that you said the minister did not make a determination in relation to the matter. Is this common? And if so, when might a minister typically make a determination in relation to interim protection?
So it's not uncommon for the minister not yet to have made a decision on the matter. The deciding factor here in the minister making a decision is that council has not yet adopted the heritage citation and has not decided to seek authorisation for permanent heritage overlay. Should the UPDC resolve the officer recommendation and support the officer recommendation that's in front of you tonight, and we will lodge the request for authorisation for the permanent controls, then the minister will move, or his delegate will move to making a decision on the interim HL request as well. It's just waiting for this decision to be made, and that's why a decision hasn't been made at this point in time.
Yep.
Follow up. Does the minister or his delegate undertake further research or investigations as part of their deliberation or determination?
The department might, if they think it's necessary, seek the views from internal resources as well, at Heritage Victoria, for example. But whether they will do that on this occasion, we generally are not told and don't find out as to what internal advice they seek specifically. But where there are where things are doubtful or they've got their questions, they might seek further advice, irrespective or independent of the advice that council has provided them.
One final question: how, if I may, how typically does the minister follow slavishly what council recommends, or does the minister? Is it common for the minister to take a varying position?
I wouldn't have said that the minister takes a slavish response to that. I mean, it's recently, we've had the interim and permanent HO request for Wong Coolangatta Road refused on that account. So certainly where there might be cases where there is doubt or that are borderline, then the minister might decide that. We don't believe that this is a borderline case. We don't believe that from what we've heard so far, that there's any indication that this will not be supported. but the Minister makes his own decision.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. Mr. Wilmson, I wanted to confirm or check a heritage overlay process once it starts. Does that in any way impact on an owner's ability to submit information that would deem a property structurally unsound? Is there any way that this would hinder the process of that determination that the building is not structurally sound based on what the engineer's reports have said?
That's a complex question because this goes into the area of building and occupant and public safety as well. So if the building were to become so structurally unsound and deteriorate so quickly, then there's the municipal building surveyor, for example, could step in, and my understanding is they could issue protection works notice irrespective of whether the property is in a heritage overlay or not. But that's probably a little bit outside my realm of expertise. The fact that at the moment the property is not in a heritage overlay, so there are no planning permit triggers for the demolition of that building, only for building some works. So that would normally exist under the zone depending on the size of the land. So it's unfortunately they're caught sort of a little bit in between. They can't get a building permit for the demolition because of the interim request, but they can't get a planning permit because the interim HR request hasn't been determined yet. That's an unfortunate effect of how the two pieces of legislation work together. Don't know whether that answered your question entirely, but yeah, it's a complex matter with many variables.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry to ask a follow-up question. Just carrying on from Councillor Addis's question with regard to if the applicant was to lodge a planning permit application during the course of the interim control determination, would that warrant then council officers to physically go on the site and do a physical inspection and assess what is deemed to be the structural concerns that the applicant's raising? Or would the applicant have to wait until we have a determination from the Minister of whether interim controls are supported?
So they can't actually apply for a planning permit. There's no planning permit trigger that exists at the moment because the site's not in heritage overlay. So that avenue is not open to them. The only way that there could be in council getting it's the municipal building surveyor if the building were to become a danger to its occupants and other parties.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, through you, Chair. I understand that there is a Section 29A that's current, Mr. Wilmson, and what's the expiry period on that with regards to when council's got to make a decision, or officers under delegation make a decision on that Section 29A?
It's my understanding that that Section 29A either already has been suspended or will be suspended shortly since that's come in. That came in last week, I think. So council has 15 days. I don't know exactly the date that it was lodged. My apologies. But we've certainly, strategic planning officers have already advised council's building services to suspend the application, and that should be imminent within the timeframe that's required. And that's been suspended on the basis of the Section 20 Part 4 interim HR request still sitting with the Minister and having been lodged already.
Mr. Wilmson, just for the sake of viewers, you might make reference to what a Section 29A is so that there's clarity.
Yes, so Section 29A is the provision under the Building Act. It's a report and consent application that building surveyors have to seek from council when they are considering issuing a building permit for certain works. Section 29B allows council to suspend or refuse an application or refuse consent and that will prevent the building surveyor from actually issuing a building permit, which can then be acted upon to demolish the building.
Thank you. So, councillors, I think we're at the end of our questions. So I'll return to Councillor Watson, who foreshadowed a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I foreshadow a motion, as you mentioned, and am prepared to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Addis. Just to assist Councillor Watson, is there any opposition? There is some degree of opposition. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a number of different things tonight, and the history of this particular heritage assessment has been brought up, and I wanted to touch briefly on that so that perhaps some of the new councillors could understand what the journey has been to this particular point in time. So this initially in the 2012 council, the Baldwin Heritage Gap Study came to the council chamber. There was a pushback from the community for properties that were essentially mid-century, and that the council made the decision at the time to not pursue the Baldwin Gap Study. Now, 2016 came along and a new council was elected, and I was elected in that cohort and believed that the Baldwin Heritage Gap Study needed to be revisited because, as I said at the time, they'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we had significant properties such as the Baldwin Cinema sitting there unprotected. So we've now fast forward to this particular period of time, and in listening to the presentations tonight, it certainly seems like a battle of the heritage consultants, where we've got 4 in the mix. I'm satisfied that we've received good advice on this particular property. I in no way hold myself out to be an expert on heritage, and in particular mid-century heritage. So I lean very much on the advice that we receive from the heritage consultants. I am satisfied by the answer given by Mr. Wilmington that the matter of structural integrity of the site, there is a means for dealing with that at an appropriate time. But at this moment in time, the issue is whether the building itself and the architect in question, being Alistair Knox, whether that is a matter that we believe is worthy to consider heritage protection of, and to put this forward to the Minister for Planning. So I'll leave my comments there and urge my fellow councillors to give this matter their due consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm glad heritage consultants can have a differing opinion, but acknowledge my opposition may be a moot point, as it appears that there is support for this. 32 Corby Street offers a view into mid-century mature modern style, which is a term coined by Dr. Goad, who describes that sub-style of architecture during the 60s. Goad actually identified several leading architects as key practitioners into that style, and Knox was notably absent from that. However, Knox himself is recognised for his own contribution, which was noted through his Doctor of Architecture in 1984, and that was for the Eltham style, not the mature modern style. Council's heritage consultants context and built together with the heritage consultants of Bryce, Rayworth and Trethowan Architecture, and we did receive that on the weekend, councillors, engaged by the current owners, all agree upon one thing about Cox's contributing to the architectural design world, but more specifically around two periods of his actual life, which is around the mud brick exploration, materiality, exposed timbers, rectilinear forms and those sorts of things. That sort of bridged either side of this period that we're actually talking about now, and it's all formed itself around natural landscapes. The Heritage's advisors have called this a more conventional in both design and materiality when compared to a number of the other projects that Knox himself is best known for. Where the four heritage consultants differ is whether or not this property actually contributes to Knox in his career or even mature modernity in terms of the architectural style, particularly in the face that there are finer examples of that, say from the likes of McGlashan, who's very much known, and we've got a number of their properties. His property is actually protected as such. So it's been considered as less adventurous and more suburban. In fact, it's actually quite unremarkable, this building, as quoted by Built Heritage. None of the other buildings that Knox has designed in the city of Boroondara are directly comparable to this subject building. So weighing all this up, you know, the criterion that all the consultants are actually in disagreement, even those in support are slightly in disagreement with each other. I believe this property does have heritage value, but agree with Trethowan Architecture that, you know, and they are very well qualified heritage consultants, that it's not significant enough that this building actually stands out as a high bar for Knox's architecture himself, or even as a high bar example of mature modern architectural style. I'd see nowhere in any of the reports that actually picks those up in unanimous support. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here, councillors. If we're going to celebrate Alistair Knox, we celebrate him for what he's known, his Eltham style, and that's what the foundation is there for. And I'm not surprised the foundation has remained silent on this particular property. I'm playing devil's advocate. I might be on my own. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to support Councillor Thompson, Mayor Thompson, I'm also not supporting this, and I just wanted to say I have agonised over this decision for weeks. I have read all the data, all the expert reports and opinions and the structural engineer assessments, and I was hoping tonight that there would be something revealed in addition to that could help me feel more comfortable to make this more palatable. But unfortunately, what I've heard tonight has actually swayed me more in the opposite direction. There's nothing convincing from any of the experts that support heritage value of this specific property. Contributory status, yes, significant. I'm sorry, but I just can't support that. And I really struggle with the anguish the property owners will endure if we do support this. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. Look, I do support this motion, but equally I do have a great deal of sympathy for what the owners must be going through. I think it's really hard when we buy a property and then we realise we can't actually necessarily do what we want to do with it. But that is how planning works, and properties become covered by a heritage overlay at different times. So unfortunately, it isn't a totally predictable and safe process when we buy a property. We live in a community, and sometimes we have to abide by the rules of that community. Like others, I certainly don't purport to have any particular heritage expertise. I love old houses, and I love the mid-century ones. And what I'm looking at is that the two detailed reports have actually supported that this is of significance. The two reports that haven't have actually been quite brief assessments, and so I feel I have to give more weight to the two very detailed reports that have clearly stated they believe it's worthy of protection. And while I have great sympathy for the fact that the owners believe this is structurally unsound, this is a different process. We're here to discuss heritage. There's actually a different process that needs to be followed to determine that a building is structurally unsound. So I've got to turn my mind to the heritage, and in my view, it has been established. So I think we need to give this property the opportunity to be further tested and just give it a chance to be protected. We don't have an awful lot of the mid-century ones, and I think we should protect them if we can. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Thanks. Like others who've spoken, I've been challenged by this one, and coming to a decision on it hasn't been easy. I'm going to support the officer's recommendation, but I do note, and I think it's telling, that when our mayor, who's an architect and who has an appreciation of mid-century, on balance goes the other way, and that's a sincere position, that it's also speaking to me saying, well, look, maybe this one's not so straightforward, and I can see that. Like Councillor Addis has said, though, I mean, I'm pretty much the same thing. I'm giving the weight to the greater reports there, but I'm very torn with it. I don't think we've done enough in the area of mid-century to look at it, and I am concerned that we just turn away. But it's not easy. I think they're sincerely held positions, and I respect the different positions that have been presented here today. I do think it's a real challenge, the way we've gone about addressing heritage, and I think we've taken some important steps in being a lot more transparent with the way we list properties for future consideration, for people who are purchasing properties, for people who are redeveloping their homes, who are unaware that, you know, a property may appear on a heritage, for a heritage study or for a heritage overlay, and it's deeply problematic. And this really concerns me from separate to the whole issue of heritage. You know, people genuinely invest in, pay for an architect, get designs done, expecting to demolish a property and move ahead, and then you're told, oh, by the way, your property's on, you know, a list to be looked at, and we're going to impose an interim overlay on it. It is problematic, and that does cause me concern. I think we're moving away from that model and removing the remaining properties from that list and approaching it in a more transparent way. I think that's positive, but it doesn't give comfort to the owner in this case. Anyway, look, I'm going to go with the officer's recommendation, but I recognise that there are still opportunities to reconsider the issue and to present further reports, and I certainly look forward to reading again in more detail. Thank you.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I think my position most closely aligns with Councillor Addis, and I echo her words. A point that that was raised by Councillor Watson that I think is really valid in this situation is that our appreciation for architecture, particularly of this era, grows over time, and our appreciation for these homes may not have been what it is today 5 or 10 or more years ago. On the weekend, I had a drive around the neighbourhood and drove past this property, but also had a drive around, you know, Baldwin and Kew and Deep Dean and various other areas in that neighbourhood to try and find other similar properties. I really love this style of architecture, and you know, they're few and far between. It's not like they're in abundance in Baldwin; they're not. So that gave me great comfort, I suppose, in in reconciling my position to be where the officer's recommendation is. And I understand that it might not be the finest example, but unfortunately we've lost so many over the years that I really do think that this is worth preserving, notwithstanding the anguish that the property owners have been through, and the energy that they've put into putting forward their position. And you know, it's heartfelt. You know, we're all struggling a little with this decision, I think, but I think for future generations, it's absolutely worth preserving this one. So I'll be supporting the motion put by Councillor Watson.
Councillor Gillies.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will try not to recap on points that I've already made. The question before us is not whether the house is structurally sound or which of the conflicting consultants' views is correct, or perhaps I should say more correct, nor is it up to us to make any judgment calls on the character or integrity of Alistair Knox. Our question is whether there is a case for heritage protection. Could this be an important piece in the story of Australian architectural development? Maybe there's a question mark over whether it's truly accredited to Alistair Knox. Will it stand up to that very high bar of individual significance in the assessment process? On the basis of the heritage consultants' reports that we've read, they believe it will. So I feel that the best option here is, and I agree with the angst that we've spoken of. This is not an easy one by any means, but I think I would defer to letting the independent planning panel be the arbiter, and therefore I support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I return to Councillor Watson, is there anyone else wishing to speak? As the ward councillor, I support the motion that's been moved, and I generally concur with the what's been said by the speakers in favour of the motion. So I won't repeat any of that, but I'd urge councillors to support the motion. Councillor Watson, any reply?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to say that I appreciate Mayor Thompson putting an alternative point of view and acknowledge that he does have perhaps more expertise in the area of architecture than we do. So I appreciate the remarks that he said, and I'd like to just conclude by saying that we've been presented with a lot of information here tonight, and the substantive heritage consultant reports have given us the advice, and the officers as well, that this property is worthy of heritage consideration. So I would urge fellow councillors to support the motion and to proceed to make a submission to the Minister on this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, those in favour? Those against? That motion is carried. That takes us to item 3.2, Inner South East Land Use Framework Plan. And that report will be presented by Mr. Robert Costello, acting Principal Strategic Planner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is endorsement of the mission prepared by officers in response to the consultation draft of the Inner South East Metro Land Use Framework Plan, released on the 24th of August of this year by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. The Inner South East Metro Land Use Framework Plan was released as part of 6 such framework plans covering metropolitan Melbourne. Feedback on the Land Use Framework Plan is due by the 24th of October. The purpose of the Land Use Framework Plans is to translate the directions of Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050 into regionally specific planning frameworks across Melbourne. Boroondara forms part of the Inner South East region, comprising the cities of Boroondara, Stonnington, Glen Eira and Bayside. Officers from relevant council departments have reviewed the plan. Overall, the directions and strategies of the Land Use Framework Plan are high level and generally reinforce long-held planning directions and policies, such as an activity centres hierarchy, urban consolidation objectives, transport planning and integration, livability and environmental sustainability. In reviewing the Land Use Framework Plan, officers have identified the following key issues. Identification of 400 to 800 metre walkable catchments around activity centres and corridors for the provision of housing diversity. Identification of the area around Willison Station as a future housing investigation area. Reliance on private land to support increased tree canopy provision despite these locations experiencing the most substantial tree canopy loss, and an overall lack of leadership by the Victorian Government on environmentally sustainable design and other environmental issues. Should the UPDC resolve to endorse the submission provided attachment 2 to this report, officers will forward the submission to Engage Victoria. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Just foreshadow a motion at the appropriate time.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So, Councillor Watson, your motion, please.
The officer's recommendation as presented, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Thompson. To assist Councillor Watson, is there any opposition at this juncture? It doesn't appear to be opposed. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be brief to thank the officers for their very thorough assessment of the report, and the recommendations are sound. I hope that the Department of Water, DELP, rather than go through the long name, I hope that they take those recommendations that our officers are making seriously into consideration, because many of the things that were put forward to us in that report were deeply flawed and need to be rethought. So thank you very much, officers, for your very thorough report, and it's my very great pleasure to move this motion to adopt this recommendation.
Thank you. So if my reckoning is right, there's no opposition, in which case I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Item 3.3, 6 and 14 Studley Park Road Q, and that report will be presented by Ms. Suna Byrne, Principal Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of governance, I am no longer of council. I have no conflict of interest. There is basis.
Sorry, just a moment. Councillor Bigger.
Is it just me, or I'm only catching every third word? It's going to be hard to follow.
Yeah, let's see how we go. Ms. Byrne, just start again, and we'll see how we go.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interests of transparency and good governance, I am no longer employed by council. I have no conflict of interest in this matter.
Thank you. That was very clear as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is a sound strategic basis for locating a multi-storey retirement village in this location on the immediate periphery of Kew Junction Major Activity Centre. Council's municipal strategic statement identifies interrelated key issues of the municipality's ageing population, a desire to age in place, and a lack of housing diversity, particularly a lack of smaller, low maintenance accommodation compared with the traditional detached dwelling on a large garden allotment. Council's General Residential Zone Schedule 4, GRZ4, and the associated neighbourhood character policy for land within the GRZ4 was specifically created by Council to facilitate development at a greater height and density than the surrounding area on anomalously large sites such as this one, which has a site area in the vicinity of 16,000 square metres. The development is considered to achieve an exemplary design standard, and the development retains, repurposes and restores 3 significant heritage places. The development also sets aside more than 10% of its site area for communal outdoor landscaped spaces. The development retains 27 canopy trees and proposes planting of 151 new trees, such that the site will achieve 44% canopy cover over outdoor space within 10 years. The development also only proposes 38.4% site coverage. Council's urban designer describes the development as meticulously crafted and thoughtfully and expertly executed to suit the site and locale, noting the architectural expression reinvents familiar features of the arts and crafts movement in an imaginative manner to provide local relevance and allow the new buildings to talk to their historic neighbours and nestle comfortably within their surroundings. Notwithstanding that Res Code does not apply to retirement village developments, the proposal achieves a very high level of compliance, including with the site coverage standards, permeability, side and rear setback standard, subject to conditions, overshadowing, overlooking, and open space. The proposed demolition and buildings and works within the heritage overlay are described by Council's heritage advisor as having a positive impact on the heritage fabric, noting that the new multi-level buildings are located outside that part of the land affected by the heritage overlay, and that they are well spaced from the heritage buildings that are to be retained. Details of the proposal and discussion of all objections and assessment against the relevant controls and policies are set out in the report that forms part of the agenda for tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. 15 people have indicated they wish to make a submission on this matter. Once I've announced your name, a member of the governance team will enable access to the meeting, so you may make your submission. If a submitter is not present when their name is called, or a submitter experiences a technical issue, we will move on to the next speaker. Once all speakers have made their submission, we will again attempt to hear from any speaker who experience technical issues. I remind submitters there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes. Please commence the submission with your name and the suburb in which you reside. I have our first submitter as John and Susie Renone. I'm not sure about the correct pronunciation, but good evening. John or Susie, are you with us? Sure.
I'm here. Hello.
Oh, good. Okay. Are you presenting or Susie?
Susie's watching. Susie's not available because she's
That's
dating
fine.
my son at the moment.
That's perfectly fine. So you have 3 minutes to make your presentation, and if I could just ask you to commence with your name and the suburb in which you reside.
Yes, my name's John Renoni. I live at 14 Fernhurst Grove, Kew.
Thank you.
Can I share the screen?
Yes, we've got that.
Okay, my main, you can see in yellow here, that's where our bedrooms are. Our objection is to this underground car park with the cars coming out and the noise and the light that will interrupt our sleep. It's quite a quiet street at the moment. We've been living here for 20 years without a problem. And we do see this increased traffic as a major concern. I consider Fernhurst Grove to be a residential street. So this car park entrance should be relocated to Studley Park Road. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you. If we could just, so I'll just see if there's any questions from councillors. There doesn't appear to be. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Next up will be Mrs. Mary Drost, followed by Rosetta Palumbo. So we'll just bring Mrs. Drost on. No? No appearance. So we will move to Rosetta Palumbo, who'll be followed by Alan King.
Hello,
Rosetta,
I'm
with
here.
us? Yep. Can you just start your...
Start my video, yeah, I will do that.
Yep. And if we just have your name and the suburb in which you reside.
My name's Rosetta Palumbo. I live in Kew.
Okay, and when you're ready.
I'm ready. Look, we're devastated and concerned with the proposed plan for Villa Maria on the Villa Maria site. I'd like to focus only on 2 points today, although I have lodged many others with council. The first one is overshadowing and loss of natural light. That's a huge concern for my family. Our mental health and well-being will be dramatically impacted through the loss of natural light, the loss of open space, and the significant increased noise, both through the construction phase and increased density. It's 109 apartments, for heaven's sake, 109. Wow. The unsightly monoliths will block natural light to what we believe till 11 a.m. As we know, natural light, it improves your mood, it can stave off seasonal affective disorder. You know, we should be increasing natural light, not diminishing it in the home. And also, let's be frank here, the images supplied at the engagement session, they're deceptive and they're certainly misleading. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a surveyor, but even I know that a 5-story building will tower over our single and double-story homes. That's not what's portrayed in those images, not at all. My next point is specifically the impact on Bunnool Avenue, where I live. It's a residential street with a partial heritage overlay. To have 5-story monoliths looming over our backyard and our property, it's soul destroying. This development will devastate and dominate a traditional residential precinct and change its inherent character forever. The adverse impact on the neighbourhood amenity and our community is clear. We certainly haven't had enough time to discuss this application with the relevant planning officials. I'd actually like the opportunity to meet with officials in person.
30 seconds remaining.
We need time to navigate the minutiae of this multi-million-dollar development. We don't believe the council has taken our concerns seriously. Living during these COVID times has been extremely difficult. We're exhausted, and now we're confronted by this. Our concerns have not been addressed. I'd like to see accurate technical drawings, not an artist's impression of what it's going to look like. Those drawings
Okay, I need to stop
the
you there. But...
development on Bunnool Avenue. I'd like council to reject.
All right. So let me just see if there's any questions from councillors. No, there don't appear to be. So thank you for your presentation. And we'll move now to Ms. Alan King.
You're muted. I'm unmuted. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. And if you could start your presentation with your name and suburb, please.
My name is Ellen King. I live in Fernhurst Grove. I also have a visual presentation that should be going up.
That's fine. That's it.
This is taken by a qualified CASA drone operator, and he went up at 19 metres, which is actually below the top height of these buildings. And I think it would fairly support the previous speaker in that he's very dominating. Now, you've got to also take in, when you look around, that 79 more trees are disappearing. So if you think it won't be seen because of the trees, a lot more are going. If you can see the windows of a house a long, long way away, you will see these buildings back. And that's the point that I'm making on this. These are, in fact, probably the most important aspect of all, that many decisions were calculated on the artist's impressions that were of towers. The dimensions are unrealistic and inaccurate, and they're designed to diminish the visual bulk and height. The applicants actually were requested to supply certified renders of the towers so we could actually see what they look like. This request was refused. The important aspect to this is that adding 20 metres to the natural ground height of 68 to 69 metres above sea level, plus the removal of 79 trees, will bring into clear relief the bulk and height of the edifices you will vote on tonight. They were so obviously dominating the surrounding heritage landscape, and they'll be visible to all. They are not nestling down in this precinct at all. It was quite inaccurate to say that when they're going to be so high, and you can see from that video. Another small part was there was many issues, but one of the ones that really annoyed me was the applicant had shown little concern for the location of the electric substation and its continuous hum. The EM Watch states that the minimum 3 to 8 metres emit extra above ground radiation. Should not the applicant have OHS policy matching this high level development, as do other enlightened companies, and place these underground or in the basement? The other aspect is that well, there's about 10 more, but the one that concerns me as councillors and as an ex-councillor, I'm concerned that there's many aspects that have not been considered properly.
30 seconds remaining.
The time taken from under COVID for the rapid complexity to this state is 3 months. A normal house takes longer than that. This is a very complex, comprehensive project, and it has taken such a short time. We haven't even had a look at the detail and had time. Now, for example, this meeting, I got notice of it last week. Where could I get time to look at the information and go ahead and examine it? It's been
okay. Thank you for your presentation. Your time has elapsed, but I'll just check if there's any questions by councillors. There is one from Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Ms. King, just a question regarding the proposed development. Are you opposed to any of the development there, or what you're saying is that the actual size is just too overwhelming?
No, actually, I think it's an ideal place for such a development. I think if it was well designed and appropriate for the height that is suitable for older people, for example, coming down a flight of stairs at night when you can't use the lift because of fire, there's issues like this that have never been thought. But no, I think generally speaking, something that really did nestle into the surrounds and was correctly designed, I think the concept there for a great idea, but it is just too high.
Thank you. That appears to have exhausted questions. So thank you for your presentation, Ms. King. That takes us to Ms. Sarah Pearson, and she'll be followed by Lorenzo Rigoni.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening. If you could just start with your name and suburb, please.
Sarah Pearson, Elphingston Court Q.
Thank you.
2 Elphingston Court Q. And we oppose the plan. The points are the deceitful photomontage of 2 Elphingston Court as compared to photographs taken down Elphingston Court have not been addressed. Buildings B, C and D mass overwhelms our home, the court and the suburbs. Res Code 17 and 22 in relation to our southern habitable rooms, as you can see when we go on screen, I'm in the study, need to be reviewed. And referring to your agenda, I resent the unempathic fine-tuning quotation to describe the scale transition of the development. And also on page 54, a few relative minor modifications in the northwestern elevation should help amber the visual mass and address any adverse impacts. From page 55, building C and D, the 5th floor may be set back marginally to minimise the potential visual impact on the private space and adjoining properties. I reject all those descriptions and employ that the building height be reduced and setbacks increased. Standards are one thing. Council, you have the power and you should show leadership in rejecting what is unacceptable. The site is essentially part of a residential zone and those standards override the privileged GRZ4 and residential retirement looseness. The amenity of Elphingston Court and the municipality is threatened by bulk, the overlooking potential devaluation of property and its amenity. Physically and emotionally, we are overwhelmed, and the ideal to age in our home is our right, and it is now questionable, and it is ironic that you want a retirement complex to us. I oppose it. We need reduction in height, increased setbacks. The Melaleuca screening, if you can see behind me, is habitable to the fauna. We want fast growing and non-deciduous. We want opaque glass windows. We want the 239, that's an average 3-bedroom home, square metre terrace to be properly screened. You say planters, it's ludicrous. Council should recommend the restrictions on community use.
30 seconds remaining.
Bundara Community Plan says our neighbourhood character and heritage should remain a focus for council. And council precinct states any development contribute positively to the existing or preferred neighbourhood character whilst minimising adverse impacts on the neighbouring properties. You have the power and should show leadership. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll just see if there's any questions.
If you could just put the screen behind me, please.
What do you mean?
Oh.
What do you mean the screen?
Yep. No, we don't seem to have any questions. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation. We'll move now to Lorenzo Rigoni, who'll be followed by Christy Plumridge.
Yeah. You didn't read or? No, well, they didn't let us say anything. 3 minutes.
Hello?
We're still on mute.
Mr. Rigoni, is it?
Not home. We're still on the camera. We'll keep talking if you like.
Hi, Councillor.
Probably not a good idea. So, Mr. Rigoni.
Yes, thank you, Councillor.
If you could start with your name and suburb, thanks.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lorenzo Rigoni. I'm a planning consultant from Terrain Consulting Group based in Kew. And I represent Alyssa Kaplan of 1 Store Street, Kew, who lodged a formal objection to the application. The planning permit is required for a retirement village. As such, proposals required to meet the general residential purposes, which includes development that respects the neighbourhood character of the area. And we say fundamentally, this is a starting point of where the proposal before council fails. It doesn't respond positively to neighbourhood character within the surrounding area. It's not consistent with provisions of the general residential zone, which allows up to 3-storey forms or maximum height of 11 metres. It's also contrary to council's neighbourhood character strategy by sheer height, bulk, form, and the design of the development. In terms of heritage, the site borders contributory heritage dwellings along Bernal Avenue and east along Fernhurst Grove. Quite simply, the proposal comprising 4 buildings with heights over 19 metres, 5 stories, doesn't respect or enhance the immediate surrounding neighbourhood. And if council looked at page 85 of the council report, it gives a good indication of the significant mass and bulk of the 5-storey buildings relative to the heritage buildings on the property. The applicant refers to council's Boroondara housing strategy to December 2015, but we note that's not a reference document or incorporated document within the Boroondara planning scheme, nor has it reflected updates within the Boroondara planning scheme, particularly the amendments in VC 110 and 27th of March 2017, which provided the mandatory height controls in the general residential zone. The site's not located in the Kew Junction Activity Centre, which would otherwise justify the scale, height and bulk, the number of stories proposed. We've assessed it against Precinct 15, the character policy, and what we find is the site surrounded by either 1 or 2 story dwellings introduces development which is more than double the height of the existing dwelling stock, we say is unreasonable and above the prevailing building height. The question we do have is, why is it their floor to ceiling heights at 3.5 metres per floor per dwelling, when typically heights of a room are in the order of 2.7 metres? A building height of 90 metres is usually associated with 6 to 7 story development. The building height form scale would have no regard to visual amenity effects upon the contributory and significant heritage dwellings surrounding the site. So in conclusion, in 2018, the planning scheme was amended to provide a maximum height of 11 metres or 3 stories for the general residential zone 4. The applicant's position is that these height restrictions do not apply to retirement villages, but we know that there's no statement of government policy to support this view. It's a discretionary matter within the general residential zone. There has, however, been a government mandate to limit residential aged care facilities pursuant to clause 5317, but even those have a maximum height of 16 metres. Fundamentally, general residential zone 4 allows for developments of greater size and density if they respect the neighbourhood character of the area, and clearly this proposal doesn't satisfy the neighbourhood character and heritage objectives of the Boroondara planning scheme. An alternative for a 3-story form would allow for development of greater height and density than the surrounding area without detrimentally impacting on the preferred character of the precinct. It would respect the prevailing height of surrounding area, heritage dwellings and 1 to 2 story building forms. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Now, I'll just check if there's any questions. There aren't, so thank you for your presentation. Councillor Galt, can you just confirm that you're hearing us and all's well there?
All back and present, thanks very much.
Excellent, okay. So our next presenter is Christy Plumridge, who'll be followed by Andrew Buzzacott.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we could just get you to start with your name and suburb, please.
My name is Christy Plumridge. I'm the owner of 16 Fernhurst Grove, Kew. This is a sad story. It is sad because you're about to make a massive $1 million decision on opinion and not fact. It is sad because the decision you're about to make is actually not on 108 apartments, but the 5 multi-million-dollar penthouses that sit on the top of the 4 towers, well above the height that would be deemed reasonable. This height is a major concern of our residents. It is sad because most of you have not been to the site to discuss with residents firsthand what their experience is or what the real height means for the privacy and well-being of residents, especially along Bernal and Effiston Court. It is sad because for 6 years, the owner of the site, who has nearly $1 billion in assets, has had the opportunity to consult with residents on reasonable development, but never has. Instead, a slick sales document was produced in the last few months of lockdown, full of misleading photos and no actual renders. This misleading photos is a serious matter of deceptive conduct, and if not addressed in this forum, will be addressed in another process. It is sad because we, the residents, want something special developed on this historic site. The good things about the proposed development are overshadowed by unreasonable heights of towers. It is sad because 3 years ago, Council said it was against developments of aged cares of more than 13.5 metres, and I refer to your own application to the state government on the 21st of May 2018. I'm sad for the 800 staff at Council who must be wondering what Council really stands for in terms of height and protecting the neighbourhood character, key platforms, many of which this Council were elected to represent. I am sad that it seems one rule for residents, see your own precinct statements where you require ensuring developments and additions respect the predominant scale of buildings and forms of streetscape, and another rule for companies with millions of dollars to spend on expensive advisors and lawyers who manipulate regulations around height in their favour.
Ms. Plumridge, can I just remind you that the council has made no decision here. We're actually here tonight to make a decision. I'm a little bit intrigued by the tone of some of your submission. So can I ask that you bear in mind that the 11 councillors who are intently listening to your submission will be making a decision, but you ought not to be making your submission as if some predetermined position has been arrived at. The 11 councillors will make a decision. They haven't as yet. So I think perhaps that's been lost somewhere along the line. So if I could just ask you that you be mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In front of you is a decision, and that is, do you support this development of 108 apartments reaching over nearly 21 metres into the sky, or creating a place for residents? Do you defer your decision for 2 weeks until lockdown in Melbourne is over and you can each come to the site together to witness for yourself how this proposal will affect local residents, especially those in Bernal and Eppston Court? That would be a courageous decision to make tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just see if there's any questions from councillors. I'm not seeing any, so thank you for your presentation. The next speaker is Andrew Buzzacott, who will be followed by Peter Wilkinson. Mr. Buzzacott, good evening.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can, if you could just start with your name and suburb, please.
My name's Andrew Buzzacott and I'm from Kew. I'm actually a neighbour of the site. Could my presentation be brought up?
Yes, we'll do that. There we go.
I'd just like to point out a couple of things about the officer's report. I'm broadly in support of earlier submissions. This one is particularly troubling because it's quite misleading. You can just see, oh no, back to the first one. You can just see peeking over the house on the left is what's meant to be Building C. Building C is of 17 to 18 metres in height. Now the tree on towards the right of the photograph is 15 to 20 metres high. So the buildings will not be set back that far from that tree. Building B will actually be behind that tree. And so it's quite misleading to say that the buildings B and C sort of can't be seen from Bernal Avenue. Next slide, please. And this is demonstrated by, some of the quality has dropped off in emailing it through. And the next slide, please. When you see the photographs in here, it quite easily can be seen that it's quite dominating over the back fences of our houses. Now, the next issue I have is, so that's, I believe that the report is misleading. So I would suggest that decisions shouldn't be made purely on these photographs and suggestions. The other is, I think the report misses opportunities. The neighbourhood character of Studley Park is very much about the built environment as well as the high level of tree canopy, Indigenous and exotic. The proposal makes much of its proposed landscaping, and the arborist report covered in attachment in the attachments recommends additional deep planting to better integrate the development into the local surrounding area. But this was knocked back by the officer's report. Now, with the history of the Villa Maria and Catholic homes, can I go to the next slide, please? This is a a representative or photograph of the Hawthorn site, the next slide.
30
Next slide.
seconds remaining.
Yep. These sort of indicate what we're going to end up with. What I'm worried about is if we don't have deep planting, these sites will become just heat sinks. And on the eve of Glasgow, I think we all should be needing to build in much better environmental support for the residents, so that the buildings are shaded in the summer. And
okay, that exhausts your time, Mr. Buzzacott. I'll just see if there's any questions from councillors. I'm not seeing any. So thank you for your presentation. And we'll move to Mr. Wilkinson, who'll be followed by Adam and Hilary Davis. Good evening, Mr. Wilkinson.
There we are. Good evening.
If you could just start with your name and suburb, please.
Yeah, Peter Wilkinson, 1 Fernhurst Grove in Kew.
Thank you.
I'm the owner and occupier of 1 Fernhurst Grove, which is bounded along its northern, western and southern boundaries by the site. Our property is the most affected adjoining property. The council should refuse this application as it will cause detrimental impacts to our property, along with impacts to the established single double storey character and amenity of the surrounding area. The proposed building B is sited uphill from the rear western interface of my property and rises 5 levels above the existing raised car park on site. When combined with the slope of the land and the raised ground that the building is to be sited on, a 22.37 metre building height is presented to my rear boundary. This is equivalent to a 6 or 7 storey building. The proposal should be refused for the following grounds. The proposal fails to achieve an acceptable outcome in respect to the zone provision, the planning policy framework and the local planning policy. The proposal causes significant and unacceptable amenity outcome to my property by way of overshadowing and visual impacts. The proposal creates adverse and unacceptable character impacts to the surrounding neighbourhood and heritage character. Specifically, the proposal is inconsistent with the purpose of the general residential zone. The proposal is contrary to the discretionary uses policy, which seeks to ensure that the scale of built form around the perimeter of supersized lots is consistent with the prevailing streetscape and the scale of adjacent development. The proposal creates an abrupt and entirely inappropriate interface to the adjoining residential zone. The abrupt and uncomfortable height transition from a building equivalent to 6 to 7 stories compared to our dwelling of 2 stories is fundamentally deficient and unreasonable. The proposal is contrary to the character policy, which only seeks to support increased building heights within a site where it can be demonstrated that the increased height will not adversely impact the precinct's preferred character, and the proposal is inconsistent with the design guidelines for the area that seek new development to be integrated with the precinct's detached historic buildings of 1 and 2 storey. Simply put, the equivalent 6 to 7 storey height and scale of the proposed building B does not provide an appropriate or suitable transition to the sensitive double storey residential interface of my property. My back garden and importantly my swimming pool will be severely and unreasonably impacted. It is a greedy overdevelopment that has entirely insufficient regard to the relevant policies contained within the planning scheme and the character of the houses surrounding the site. I strongly urge council to refuse the permit. However, should the council not agree with me and decide to approve the application, I would request the following conditions. Building B of the proposed development be reduced in height by 2 levels, scale appropriately adjacent to my property interface and ensure no additional overshadowing of my pool and property. And secondly, the electricity substation should be located away from my property and further into the development. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? There doesn't appear to be. So thank you for your presentation, and we'll move to Adam and Hilary Davis, and they'll be followed by Jeffrey Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It's just Adam Davis tonight. Hilary's not with me.
No problem. If I could get you to just start with your name and suburb, and then you have 3 minutes. Thanks.
Sure. So my name's Adam Davis. I'm from 3 Stall Street in Kew on the corner of Fernhurst Grove. So thanks for this opportunity. Whilst I recognise this is an appropriate site for a retirement village, this development is just too high, as many people have already established tonight. This would cause the character of the apartment towers and the commercial buildings of Kew Junction to creep into the surrounding residential precinct. This is a precinct of heritage significance with an unusual concentration of heritage graded buildings. My home is one of those with a significant heritage overlay applying to my home. The 4 apartment buildings in this retirement village are required to not only be consistent with the character of the precinct, but they are required to enhance that character. And at 21 metres and 5 stories, the 4 apartment buildings would starkly contrast with and detrimentally impact the preferred character of this precinct. Even Council's principal planner in the report states, in elevation form, the scale relationship between the heritage buildings, those are the 3 buildings on each their own site, and the new buildings appears stark. A reduced building height of between 13 and 16 metres should be adopted by Council if they wish to proceed with this approval. Due to an anomaly in the definition of residential building, there is one particular type of building only that has no stated maximum height on this site, and that is a type of building known as a retirement village. All other types of buildings would have an 11-metre height applying to them. And I'd point out, unlike is commented in the report, this anomaly applies in all zonings in Boroondara, not just on super sites. If Council is to consider a height greater than the 9 metres that applies to the surrounding properties abounding this site, the question is how much higher should be allowed before it is unreasonably inconsistent with the character of the surrounding area. 21 metres is well above what is reasonable in this context. Council's planners have failed to set out their assessment of the impact of the height of this development on the character of the precinct. In the detailed plans report, the impact of the development on the 3 heritage buildings on the site is assessed, but there is no assessment of the impact on the surrounding precinct. I would draw Council's attention to the question of what is a reasonable height in a similar context, which is that applies for residential aged care facilities. Following extensive consultation, the introduction of the 2018 amendments to allow for retirement villages, for residential aged care facilities to have a different scale and built form to the surrounding areas, a question of what maximum height would be allowed so as not to be unreasonably affect the amenity of the surrounding neighbourhood was considered, and a 16-metre maximum height was adopted and applies to all aged care facilities. I would urge Council to adopt a height of no more than 16 metres to this proposal to be consistent with the directly comparable context of aged care facilities, and preferably the height should be no more than 13 metres for this development.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. That exhausts your time. I'll just see if there's any questions, and there aren't. So thank you, and we'll move to Mr. Brown. He'll be followed by Marianne McLean.
Jeffrey Brown here from Benool Avenue, Kew. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. If you'd like to start your presentation.
Thank you. I'm a resident of 18 Benool Avenue, Kew, and I am referring to in relation to the height, setbacks, and also traffic. There's been much commentary about the height, so I don't propose to discuss that any further. How I'll refer to the transport assessment prepared by Traffic's Group in relation to this development. In particular, the report talks about the surrounding car parking in the general street and streetscape, where it talks about 191 off-street car parking spaces. That is correct. However, the date of the report or the traffic study was the 25th of February 2021. This is during a period of lockdowns and social restrictions and people travelling to work. I look at the traffic figures and say they don't represent normal traffic flows of a normal functioning society. And of the 191 spaces, a significant portion of those used on a daily basis by the retail and commercial precincts. I then refer to page 12 of their report. There is no discussion in their report of the effects of traffic flow in Stall Street or Benool Avenue or Studley Avenue. There's traffic counts in relation to Fernhurst Grove and Studley Park Road only. This is the concern I have in relation to then the proposed condition 5 of the planning permit, which requires left in, left out traffic to Studley Park Road only. This will create an additional 40% on their traffic group's estimates flow into the Fernhurst Grove, as it'll be removed from Studley Park Road. But it'll also allow for another 30% of traffic flows which were meant to go to Studley Park Road for anyone travelling west on the site to then go to Fernhurst Road, Stall Street or Benool Avenue or Studley Avenue to be out heading a westerly direction. This will create significant traffic flows within the streetscape. Their report talks about the surplus number of car parks in their application of 35 residential spaces.
30 seconds remaining.
If the basement area is reduced by those number of spaces, the greater setbacks can be provided to the western and northern boundary for actually large canopy trees to be planted. This would then alleviate a number of issues of oversighting onto Benool Avenue and Elphinstone Court. I'm not opposed to development. I'm not opposed to a retirement village. I'm opposed to the height and the setbacks. Thank you.
Thank you. And we don't appear to have any questions, so thank you for your presentation. We'll move now to Ms. McLean, who'll be followed by Peter Grius. Ms. McLean, good evening.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. If you could just start with your name and suburb, please.
Okay, I'm Marianne McLean and I live in Fernhurst Grove Q, and I am opposite the lovely heritage homes that are supposed to be renovated, and we are all taking lots of care and attention for renovating and looking after these lovely precinct homes, but we then plan to build enormous monstrosities behind. I can only agree with everything that's been said so far as detrimentally impacting our precinct. The precinct has been, I suppose, here a lot longer than this proposed development, and we need to honour the precinct and the description that council have already come up with for our area. At the moment, the plan does not sit or nestle into our community, our precinct. It doesn't fit well with the planning scheme as far as I can ascertain. And so I would strongly disagree with the officer's recommendations. I think it sits like a bullying monstrosity on top of a hill that will be visible to everybody in all directions. And I think it would be ideal if councillors could be invited to come out and visit us and have a look at the buildings, which are, 8 or 9 stories on the corner of Kew Junction, and just imagine them transported to the site opposite us. The other thing that hasn't been brought up yet is the proposal to have a cafe at Whitty House. And as far as I can see, that's completely unnecessary. It is a use of a heritage home. I can see that there are needs to reconsider what we do with heritage homes, but there's the Kew Junction Activity Centre within walking distance, and I suspect the walk down for our retirement village purchases would probably be better for them than stopping at the cafe, which would be creating a lot of noise, a lot of increased traffic, compromise our own families visiting potentially by taking up car parking, etc. The other thing that bothers me in the plans is that the proposed plans is there's a whole lot of amendments they're requesting. So if council planners are saying that they need to have amended plans and requests for a community development plan, and then grant, the plan's approval before they've got all the amended plans, I think that's quite inappropriate. There's no mention of safety for entry and exit at the Fernhurst Grove proposed crossover.
Your time's expired, so I'll need to stop you there, but I'll just see if there's any questions. There's no questions from councillors, so thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for the time.
We'll move to Mr. Gruius, I'm not sure in the pronunciation, and he'll be followed by Peter Miglis. Not there. We'll move to Mr. Miglis. Mr. Miglis, are you with us?
Good evening.
Good evening. We'll just get you to start with your name and suburb, please.
Thank you. Peter Miglis from Woods Bagot Architects. I'm a principal there and I reside in North Fitzroy.
Thank you. And if you'd like to start your presentation.
Yes. Helen, you able to share that?
Underway.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Look, it comes with a great responsibility as an overall team to create a place that imbues a sense of quality. It's connected to its neighbourhood. And we have termed this a life well crafted, creating a soulful community that's immersed in the beauty of the nature that exists, celebrating design past, present and future. Next. This approach here really does need to be considered holistically. Firstly, a real appreciation of the heritage character of the neighbourhood and the associated residences around this particular site. A contemporary direction of retirement living that creates wellness and a true sense of community and purpose for those in their latter years. And thirdly, a true respect for the existing landscape and its inherent beauty and how this becomes integral to the overall approach. Next slide. This sketch here starts to illustrate the spirit of the place, a sense of community through a series of residences that are immersed in the landscape. And where existing heritage buildings like Whitty, Esmond and Plumstead are restored and integrated and given a new lease of life, to the extent where parts of the site are available for public use, e.g. the forecourt of Whitty House provides a public cafe and garden which will be programmed by VMCH to encourage use by local community groups. Next slide. The site master plan here communicates the high level of tree retention and opportunities of extensive new planting, all contributing to Kew's botanical and landscape character. Modest setbacks from neighbours with significant planting provides a sensitive approach to the neighbouring interfaces. And as I mentioned, external communal outdoor spaces, including the provision of semi-public community garden, can be accessed from Studley Park Road. Next slide. The amenity for these residents of early retirement is paramount, providing a sense of what they would have experienced in a home, i.e. excellent natural ventilation and good daylight, has been able to be achieved by many of these residences having a double aspect, as seen in these diagrams, creating corner opportunities.
30 seconds remaining.
We've created a high level of performance targeting, 7-star neighbours and 100% renewable energy gas free. Next slide. This particular view here shows the arrival from Fernhurst Grove, the opportunity to restore Esmond House on the right there and part of the whole approach here, and landscaping being quite pivotal in this whole approach. Next slide. This is the approach from Studley Park Road, illustrating the north-south pedestrian spine that meanders itself through the village here.
And we'll need to stop it there, but thank you for your presentation. I'll just see if there's a Question, let me see. Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Mr. Miglis, thank you for the presentation. I'm Councillor Stavro, the Ward Councillor. Just wanted to start asking with one of the questions regarding the visual bulk, and there are no 5-storey buildings anywhere in similar zoned parts of the whole neighbourhood, going all the way to Yarra Bend up north to the Kew Cottages, etc. Why not look at a more sympathetic build form?
Mr. Stavro, what we did look at, which is shown in this development, is breaking up the building into a series of buildings. So you create this sort of more village township style of approach. What could have been approached is large singular buildings, but what we've done is broken it up into a series of buildings where landscape sits amongst that to begin to soften, I guess, the overall nestling of the buildings into the landscape. And as I mentioned, to the west, there's quite modest setbacks of 9 to 13 metres adjacent to that. And obviously from Fernhurst Grove, the buildings are set back behind the heritage buildings themselves. And it's interesting how landscape in the foreground really does sort of, I guess, filter the buildings beyond as well.
Mr. Chair, there's a few questions, so I'll keep going. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Miglis. I am a little bit sort of want to tease that out a little bit more, that it's not the either or alternative, as if there's the two choices between a one block versus a nestled, as you call it, subdivided, smaller village atmosphere. You've got carte blanche, so you have the ability to come up with a creation, no doubt very creative architects that you are, to bring out a structure that's in sympathy with the neighbourhood. That's the question, the essence of the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, so I mean, again, Mr. Stavro, in terms of the form, you'll see that it's highly articulated. So we're not reading I guess a facade that's continuous and monotonous, but it's highly articulated and, as mentioned, composed as a series of buildings, further breaks down that scale.
Okay. You mentioned the village atmosphere. I think a lot of us pride, all of our wards, but particularly the Studley ward, that it has a village atmosphere in existence. Are you thinking about a village within a village, or not, why not have used the broader openness to the community to come up with something that didn't sort of reek of that sort of exclusiveness that you want to create the sort of atmosphere within that area?
I think a village naturally provides great sort of wayfinding and a community component. So allowing people of this age to feel comfortable, having clear sights, having proportionally open space between buildings where residences can come out, sit in the sun, is quite important. So we are creating, taking village principles and adopting it to our planning, and then also providing the opportunity for the community to partake in the project in strategic locations, for example, at the Whitty forecourt. And another thing that's quite important for Villa Maria is that residences are able to connect with the community and the community can connect with them as well. And in terms of just going back on building form that you mentioned earlier, the buildings themselves also sit lower than natural ground level. So they're not true 5 to 6 stories above ground level. They nestle down into the landscape. And you'll see the roof forms themselves are what we've termed a mansard roof. So they taper back. And again, these are all cues that have been taken from the existing residences, that the approach here is that the buildings look like they have been there for a while. They've taken their cues from the neighbourhood and they're not foreign, but they take materiality like brickwork and the mansard roofs as great cues from the great homes that are around the area.
Thank you. But having said that, you would agree that some of the buildings would actually have a bigger building profile given the curvature of the land, particularly towards the east.
In some areas, towards the east, very slightly, yes. But generally, the built form nestles itself as you go down to the west.
Thank you for that. Just a final question then. Just you may be prepared to answer this or not. Just thinking about whether your client would be prepared to I guess, meet the local community in a sort of something closer to the building bulk and engender the idea whether you'd be prepared to change the structure to be more acceptable.
I'll allow Peter, if he gets on, to answer that, but we've had quite a bit of community consultation. I think it was about 6 weeks ago we met the community on 2 sessions where we took them through the various plans and perspectives and so forth, the material.
Okay, thank you. The answer's no then.
I'll get Peter Gruis from Villa Maria to answer that for you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Now, I've got Councillor Watson, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Bigger. Are there others with questions? No? So, Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about the development. Are all the apartments they're going to be made available exclusively for retirees? Is it you know, sort of something special, or are they just sold to the is there some component that's going to be sold to the general public?
Yeah. Cynthia, I believe in principle it's sold to the general public, but can I please defer that question to Peter Gruis from Villa Maria Catholic Homes, who's the developer behind the project. But in principle, it's sold to anyone. I believe a particular age group demographic. Yes.
Okay, so if I could just ask a follow-up question on that, Chair. So you're developing something that's categorized as a retirement village, and you have certain exemptions to height because you're building a project that is categorized as that. But you're now saying to me there's a portion that just gets sold to anybody, which would say, what's the threshold for a retirement village? Is it 60% of your properties get sold to people who are north of 70, or like how does that all work? I'm struggling to understand it.
Cynthia, I'm sure it'll become clear when Peter Gruis can answer that from Villa Maria, but my understanding, it works under the Retirement Act and it's not sold generally to the public. So there is certain conditions that it is sold to retirees.
Okay, just one more question, Chair, if I may. So we've heard a lot of concern tonight from the residents about the height of the building, and I understand from your from your answers, that you can't answer for me what percentage is exclusively a retirement sale and what is a general public sale. But my concerns are for those penthouses. There's 5 multi-million-dollar penthouses that was talked about by a resident. They would add significantly, I believe, to the height of the building. Are those penthouses available to the general public, or are they?
Let's just hold that question for Mr. Gruis.
Yeah,
we understand he'll be coming in, so let's hold that one over.
Thank you. That concludes my questions, and
right,
I wait with interest the answers.
Indeed. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Councillor Park. I'll actually take the opportunity to ask the questions of the developer rather than the architect.
Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, I'm not sure who my questions would be best for, but I'll try I'll try with Mr. Miglis and see if he thinks it's appropriate. And because you did specifically refer to community engagement, and I note that there was a full community engagement plan that was referred to. But I'd be interested, and you said that you were offering the opportunity for residents to not only hear about the proposal, but raise any concerns that they might have had. So I'd be interested to know how many residents did raise concerns and whether any of those concerns were addressed in changes to the development. Is that a question for you, or is that better for the developer?
Councillor, I could probably answer part of that in that we had 2 sessions, one an evening session and one a morning session. And if I recall, we probably had about, I would say 12 to 15 groups that came in and visited, and which we had conversations with.
12 to 15 individuals?
Yes, yes. Some were obviously had concerns, and some were very positive about it as well. So it was quite mixed. And there was also, further to that, Peter Gruis and parts of his team met with people from Benul Avenue as well. So that, and prior to the community consultation, Peter, that hopefully gets on, met with the neighbours prior to that consultation.
Mr. Miglis, I think the key to that question, though, was did the airing of those concerns result in any changes? Were the concerns addressed in any way? I think that was the nub of the question as I understood it.
Thank you.
Council, I think they were taken on board. I would again allow Peter to answer that, Peter Gruis.
So as far as you know, you're not aware of any changes that were made in response to it, sounds like. But I will ask Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what taken on board means, but your role, Mr. Miglis, is what again? Sorry.
I'm the architect for the project.
Right. So if there'd been changes, you'd be across them, presumably.
Correct.
And there were none that you could share with us now.
No, that's right.
Okay. I guess that's the answer to the question. All right. Are there any further questions of Mr. Miglis? It doesn't appear to be. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Miglis. So we're going to endeavour to hear from Mr. Gruis again. So, Mr. Gruis, are you? Can you hear us? Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can indeed. So if I could ask you to start with your name and suburb, please.
I'm the Senior Development Manager. Peter Gruis. I'm the Senior Development Manager for VMCH, and I'm a resident of Kew East.
Thank you. And if you could give us your presentation, you've got 3 minutes. Thanks.
I almost feel like we should go straight into Q&A. Poor
we
Peter.
Can do that if you'd like.
Look, I'll do a very quick presentation, and then we can move into Q&A.
Very well.
Look, I think it's a shame I didn't get on to speak before Peter, but together with Peter Miglis at Woods Bagot and Will Pearce, our town planner, we've developed a very well thought out and considered master plan proposal, which optimises what we think is a truly unique parcel of land. It's almost 2 hectares of prime land, 150 metres from Kew Junction in a very, very special area. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'd just like to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about VMCH. So VMCH is a Catholic mission-based organisation that provides a range of support and care services into the community. We've been deeply entrenched in this community for decades. Our association with this site goes back more than 60 years, and we own and operate a number of other retirement villages throughout Boroondara, in Hawthorn, Camberwell and Deepdene. We also provide early childhood intervention and disability support services into this community, and we have a specialist education school located in Baldwin, which caters to 60 children with disabilities so that they can learn, thrive and reach their full potential. We're proud of our long history, and this project will continue that legacy. Next slide. Burundara's population is ageing. The statistics on the screen are from Council's Healthy Ageing Plan, which shows that the number of people entering their retirement years in Burundara is growing. We're aligned with Burundara in their vision to create age-friendly cities and communities. VMCH's own research has found that there's a projected undersupply of age-appropriate accommodation in this catchment, and this will continue to grow as Burundara's population ages. This undersupply can lead to a range of social and health issues, including falls and injuries associated with accommodation that isn't fit for purpose, social isolation, limited access to services, and premature entry into residential aged care. This project will provide critical housing for an ageing cohort where they can remain active, social, and connected, and age well in a community they know. Next slide, please. Our vision for this project is to deliver a project that will contribute to the landscape and heritage character of Kew and Studley Park. This is not a typical development, and VMCH is certainly not a typical developer. Our brief to Woods Bagot hasn't been about maximising yield for this site. The design for this project was informed by a series of principles that talked about the celebration and restoration of the site's heritage and natural assets, providing vibrant spaces for the public that these types of projects are so often lacking. This is not your typical retirement villages, so often gated off to its surrounds and lacking any connection to the surrounding community. This is a community that will be open and welcoming to those living beyond its borders. This project will foster healthy ageing. We embrace the human benefits of sustainability and creating healthy environments. Apartments have been designed to the highest architectural and design standards, delivering high environmental performance and outstanding amenity for its occupants. These apartments are designed to align with the livable housing design guidelines, flexible and adaptable so that residents can age in place as their needs change. This is a project we are immensely proud to deliver in a community that VMCH knows and loves. As VMCH owns and operates its assets, we designed with longevity in mind.
Mr. Greaves, are you still with us? Yeah,
did you lose me there? I am. Did you lose me there?
No, we didn't lose you. We're just having trouble with me trying to signal to you that your 3 minutes was well and truly gone.
Can I say one last sentence?
Well, no, because we've heard much of what you were saying already. So I think rather than you telling us what a quality development it is, it's probably best that we go to the questions. But in any event, you had your 3 minutes. I'd like to start, and I see councillors who have questions, so I've noted that. But I'd like to perhaps start where we finished off, which was with the question that Councillor Bigger asked, and then I'll cross back to Councillor Stafford. And I note the other councillors who've indicated questions. The question, I guess you heard the question that was asked in respect of the consultation with residents. Did you hear that question?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
So,
would you mind answering that for us?
Of course. Look, it was very important for us to engage with the community for this project, albeit under very challenging circumstances, as you can imagine, over the last 18 months. But this project has been in planning for, when I say in planning, not with council, but has been on our radar for the last 18 months. And there's been a lot of time and effort put into this proposal. I guess we activated a very robust community engagement strategy, which was prepared by an external consultant to inform, and the objective of that strategy was really to inform the local community. So we set up a website platform that outlined a program and provided residents a clear indication of when they would be involved in the process. And it gave them an idea for our aspiration, our vision for this project. We have never shied away with our intention and our aspiration for this site. We've been extremely transparent both with council and the local community throughout this process. So then toward the end of last year, we did a letterbox drop to local residents. There are about 200 local residents in the area that we invited to view the website. And then we sent a subsequent letterbox drops to invite them to attend 2 community consultation sessions, which were held in a short period where there were no lockdowns and people could attend in person. And as Peter said, there were about 15 attendees at those sessions. But that was more for them to, that was once they had seen the application, and it was more so for them to clarify any aspects of the application with members of the project team. We had our traffic consultant, planning consultant, etc., attend those meetings. I guess there was also a question around what we had done in response to feedback that we had received. I guess when we embarked on this project, we looked at the 100 odd objections we received on the previous application for this site, which was made in 2014. And that information informed our approach to this site. It was a very different scheme back then. And the objections that were made talked about things like the concentrated mass. There was only one building across the entire site. There was vegetation loss. A lot of the high value trees weren't to be kept under that proposal. The new buildings were sited in very close proximity to heritage buildings, in particular Whitty House. And there wasn't an overall master plan for the site. That proposal only envisaged development on half the site, taking a very piecemeal approach to the development. So from a first principles point of view, we considered all those objections and that previous feedback to inform the design philosophy and the design strategy for this site. Then subsequent, having met with residents, we gave them that platform to be heard and understand their concerns. No doubt a lot of those concerns you've heard tonight, a lot of them revolved around height. They revolved around the scale of the development.
All right. Look, I think we've heard your answer. I mean, what I've drawn from that is that it was a one-way consultation, or not a consultation. It was an information flow via your website, and you took into account what residents said 7 years ago, some of whom will have moved out, some of whom will have died, but there was no attempt to engage with residents in 2021 in terms of actually taking on their feedback. Is that a fair inference?
No, I don't think so, because there were...
Look, I'll leave it there, and because what I'll do is I'll hand back to the ward councillor. I know he had a number of questions, and I'm sure that Councillor Bigger will likely pursue that question. I'm not sure how I've drawn an incorrect inference out of the information, but I guess we'll hear that. So I'll hand it back to Councillor Stavrou, and then Councillor Bigger, followed by Councillor Thompson and Councillor Watson. And Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Grigas, thank you for your presentation. I'm not sure what to make the 55-year cutoff for eligibility to be buying into those apartments. I think it's far too close for comfort there. But just to get a bit of an understanding, you mentioned that you took the 2013-14 development as your feedback. Now, surely that was, again, how many stories was that? 5 stories again?
It was a single building over 5 stories.
5 stories. And even back then, just the question there, the visual bulk of the building was not at all considered or fed back to you?
That was one of the main concerns raised. And I guess height is one part of that, but the other part of that is that it was a single building and the building footprint was enormous in comparison to the buildings being proposed here.
Sure, but then I think it was 83 apartments back then, and now it's 108. So we're going down one area, we're going up somewhere else as well. So
the 83 apartments, that proposal only considered half the land holding, which means there would have been a subsequent application for the other approximately half of the land holding at a future date. So it was a lot more dense if you consider it on an apartment ratio on land area, if that makes sense. It was 80 odd apartments, but over half the size.
No, I understand that. So where I'm getting it, apart from the height, there's not much you can glean back from the feedback you had back then. So I just want to ask you then, from my experience with the ward, the feedback that I've been getting from residents is that they didn't get much of a consultation, and their feedback, acted in visible changes. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
A lot of the feedback did revolve around height, as it has tonight. So I guess we always knew that height was going to be a contentious point for this development. And I think, as has been alluded to in Peter Miggles's presentation, we have achieved a very low site coverage here, which allows us to extensively landscape and preserve the landscape character of this site. So I guess whilst we didn't reduce the overall height of the buildings, I think there was an appreciation that we had allowed for very generous setbacks, which certainly alleviated a lot of the overshadowing and overlooking issues. And it allowed us to provide a landscape buffer to our neighbours and provided ample opportunities for landscape across the site, which are also things that people were asking for and providing feedback on.
So just, I asked your colleague, Mr. Miglis, before, and I'll ask you as well. You speak about, obviously we understand how Villa Maria is embedded in the community, and we're grateful for that, and certainly a great member of the community. But one of the things being part of the community is that, there are no 5-story buildings at all around the area that we're talking about on similar zones. Why not try to be more sympathetic with the community there?
To be frankly honest, there's no other development opportunities of this scale in the area that would accommodate this type of scale of development. They simply do not exist. So this is a very rare and unique land holding, and it's a strategic redevelopment site. And I guess height is one component that's being focused on, but the intensity of the development is relatively low as compared to what it could be. I have worked for residential developers in the past, and this site could be developed a lot more densely if there was another party applying to develop this site. I think in isolation, viewing the height in isolation is misleading. I think it has to be considered in the broader kind of design philosophy for this site.
I guess where I'm perplexed a little bit is that, and I understand what you're saying, but you look at the size of some of the buildings. Building A, then sort of right next to Whitty House, and it dwarfs it. So that there's this disconnect where, from the entry to the neighbourhood there, suddenly you're viewing a much bigger structure, considerably bigger structure. And this is the disconnect that I think the community is feeling. And I just wanted to think a bit, to sort of tease out a little bit your sort of, I guess, the thinking process behind that and why you think that would be appropriate.
To focus on that observation, there is quite a generous space between Building A and the Whitty House and Stables building. And what that allows for is it allows for the retention of a lot of mature vegetation in that area, as well as a community garden that will be open for public use and a cafe space. So we have purposely left a very generous buffer between Whitty House, which is a very significant heritage building, and the built form at Building A, which provides for that transition.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a final question, Mr. Chair, and then I'll foreshadow a motion when the time's appropriate. So, Mr. Lewis, I guess one final question is, would you be prepared to work with the local community to take on board some of those bulk considerations to land on a more sympathetic build form?
Well, we're always open to discussing this proposal with the community. We've post the community and even pre-community consultation, we've had a number of one-on-one meetings with neighbours, and we welcome that open dialogue. There's absolutely no issue with that. I guess we feel that this is a sympathetic approach to this site, which certainly elevates the landscape and heritage characteristics of this site. And we've done that with a very low building footprint. And it seems that there's a fixation on height, which doesn't necessarily mean an intensity of development. But again, we're always welcome feedback and the opportunity to discuss the proposal with our neighbours.
Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Thanks, Chair. So I will start actually where you just ended, I suppose. And I know that it seems like that you might feel that there's a lot of fixation on this height issue. Having walked that site, I was surprised myself by the slope of it and the impact potentially. I mean, it's certainly on a rise. It's not in a low point on the horizon, which would be great views for the people on the 5th floor, but maybe not so great for the people in the back. So my question is, you did actually, your colleague did mention the buildings being nestled, and I'm wondering how much lower than ground level would the buildings be set? Because I didn't see that in the report, and that would seem to be relevant if it was significantly below ground level.
So it does vary. It varies from about, some of them are cut in about 1 metre and probably up to 2.5 metres in very isolated locations. And there has been a lot of thought put into the internal amenity of these apartments. And the reason we think that still works is because the setbacks are so generous. So whilst they are cut into the ground, there's still a great opportunity for natural light. Those ones that are cut into the ground at the most extreme, they're north facing and dual aspect. So we still think they're going to be very high amenity spaces.
Yeah, I probably wasn't worrying so much about the amenity of those. I was wondering whether or not it really would nestle in terms of the impact on the neighbours. It doesn't strike me as a metre being, to 2 being an enormous amount of nestling. And so I guess just to go back to this question about when you say that this has been a constant theme over even 2014, and again from what you've heard from the community, to sort of go back to that sort of engagement, community engagement. My question, part of the reason I asked about the concerns was I believe in the report you specifically did say that it was that the community engagement plan would give residents an opportunity to not just hear about it, but to express their concerns. And I just am really keen to know how, you said that you're open, whether or not that has actually or would lead to the kind of changes the community has continually asked about in terms of the height.
Yes, and we've heard those concerns, and they were certainly the same concerns raised during the previous application process, which I wasn't a part of, but we have all the information and data from that. I guess our response has been, our response is that, one, we provided very generous setbacks, which definitely softens the height impacts. A lot of the buildings are cut into the landscape, as I mentioned, 1 metre up to 2.5 metres. So in some of the most extreme examples, it kind of lessens the overall building height by up to a level. Also, Peter Miglis earlier spoke to the architecture of these buildings, in that the upper level is encased within kind of a mansard roof form. Yeah. So it appears as a building, and the upper level being a roof, which actually provides accommodation. So what we have done is all these design cues and our approach to the project and the design have aimed to soften the impacts of height, which we acknowledge is a very contentious issue.
Yeah, okay. My last point, Chair, and I promise that I'll let go, I guess is, if I was really impressed to see that the site coverage total was only 38%. That is, that's exceptional amenity for the people who are living in that village. But I just wonder why you didn't consider spreading that out and filling up a bit more of that site coverage and bringing down the height, given that that has continually been the strong community feedback.
I guess there's a lot of competing objectives. And what people love so much about Kew, and myself having grown up in Kew and being a resident of Kew East, and it's the reason I live there, is the landscape environment. And we think one of the best ways to soften the impacts of these buildings is via landscape. And landscape also has massive environmental and wellbeing benefits as well. And I think they're competing objectives. And I think we've tried our best to balance those.
Okay, thank you. Fair enough.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll try not to labour the point, and thank you for your presentation. I note the MCH is a not-for-profit organisation. That probably aligns with your statement that it's not about maximising yield for the site. Those were your words that you expressed before. So I'm going to cut straight to the point here is, will you consider lowering the height of buildings C, B and A by 1 story?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to assess in isolation, because I guess there's a very strong design philosophy around providing the landscape space but achieving greater heights. And I think to just reduce the yield in that very kind of rudimentary way is a major change to the scheme. I don't think that change can be made in isolation, no.
Okay, so it is about the yield then. So my next question then is, there was one comment with regard to Fernhurst Grove by one of the residents with regards to the vehicle access on that site. Would you consider that to be relocated onto the main road of Studley Park Road?
Yeah, so there is dual access. So there's a one point of entry where there's an existing crossover on Studley Park Road, and there's a secondary crossover. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it disperses traffic, but the other one is just safety. Studley Park Road's an extremely busy arterial, and we obviously have elderly residents who will be pulling in and out of that car park. And we thought it was important from a safety point of view to provide a second point of access on a street that carries less vehicles and lower speed environment. So it's as much about safety and amenity. I think the 2 points of access is really important.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, thanks, Chair, was, should council resolve tonight not to support your application, I guess you've got two choices. Would you go to VCAT with your current application, or would you return back to council with a lower built form?
I honestly haven't given that thought, and it's a hard one to answer right now. We think our scheme carries a lot of planning merit, and we've been really committed to seeing this process out with council, unlike a lot of applicants who would race off to VCAT at the earliest opportunity. We think this scheme has a lot of merit. We're very proud of this scheme, and we hope you can appreciate the amount of effort that's gone into developing this scheme. We think this is far superior than what alternatives could look like on this site. And I guess if there was a recommendation to kind of reduce it by a level, we would need to fundamentally redesign and review the scheme.
Okay, Chair, that's all. I'd just like to acknowledge to the developer that they've got an exceptional architect that can respond to any challenge the developer seeks to present. So if they're inclined to reduce it by 1 floor, I'm sure the outcome will be sought.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. And my question goes around, I guess, the notion of what is a retirement facility. I think I heard correctly that you only sold to people over the age of 55. Is that correct? Every 109 apartments only can be sold to someone over the age of 55?
That's correct. And the typical resident, or the typical age that a resident would enter, is between 70 and 80. Typically the average age is around 75. So they're typically a lot older than 55, but that is there, or it's a requirement of the Retirement Villages Act, but it's also there to protect residents so that they're living with like-minded people within their own age group. And that's one of the key reasons people move in. It's to live with like-minded people and for the safety and security.
Thank you. That completes my questions, Chair.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gurius, I just wanted to talk a little bit, ask you a few questions with regard to your traffic consultant and traffic advice, particularly with the design of the basement car park. My understanding is the car spaces are standard size. Is that correct? They're not additional width?
They're slightly wider than the statutory requirement.
Right. Looking at the design, they seem to be obviously compacted and very close together and very little area for manoeuvrability. And you touched yourself how your average resident, average occupier typically would be around the age of 70 to 80. And having parents live in retirement villages and then move on to aged care, I am aware of the difficulties as we get older, we have mobility issues, how hard it is to manoeuvre in and out of vehicles, but also in and out of car parks. And I just wanted to ask if there was a consideration to any modifications to design, if a consideration could also be applied to an awareness that as we get older, we do need wider car parks and greater degree of access for movability. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just have one very quick question, whether the applicant finds the officer's conditions acceptable.
Yes, we find those conditions largely workable. Yes, we do.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Franco?
Look, my question was going to be the same as Councillor Addis, but just to be clear, will we be saying, if this were to be approved, will we be seeing a VCAT application or a secondary application to amend the conditions that are in the officer's recommendation?
The conditions are largely acceptable. The one thing I will say is we'd probably need additional time to actually review what those conditions mean in detail. It obviously does change things for us, and we haven't had the time to work through the implications of those changes. But I think without being 100% confident, those conditions, there's a fair degree of confidence in me saying that those conditions are largely workable for us.
Councillors, are there any further questions? No? All right, thank you for your presentation. We'll move now to Mr. Will Pearce. Mr. Pearce, if you could start with your name and suburb, please.
Can you see me? Okay, there we go. Okay. Thank you, Mayor and Councillors, for the opportunity to talk tonight to a proposal that is very special in so many ways. My name is Will Pearce. I'm a Director of Human Habitats, a town planning firm based in Docklands, Melbourne. You've heard directly from our client and the lead architect tonight. In particular, Mr. Grios spoke about the need for this type of facility, a facility that will enable Burundara residents to age in place, age well, age gracefully, and age connected to the local community. What I would like to talk to you today about is the process that has been followed in this case. This is important, and as Mr. Grios has pointed out, the applicant has taken a unique approach to other applicants that I represent. The applicant has worked with council to progressively refine the scheme that is in response to council feedback. They've also decided against appealing directly to the tribunal to date, providing you, the elected members of this council, the opportunity to make a decision tonight in the interests of the local and also the wider community, both existing and future. Given the process that's been followed, the design execution, the technical analysis undertaken, it does not surprise us that the project has now attracted the support of the Burundara Town Planning Department. As a town planner involved in a number of projects across Burundara and Melbourne, I can honestly say that in a conventional development approach, including a 16-metre tall aged care facility, you could expect a far more challenging and dense development response on this site, including larger floor plates with a higher site coverage nearing the 60% standard, greater building crowding across the site, perhaps in a way that's less acceptable from a heritage outcome perspective, a more aggressive response to existing vegetation, and narrower side setbacks in the order of 2 to 5 metres rather than the 7+ metres that you see here. What is proposed here is not conventional, but rather an outstanding community outcome, as demonstrated by the exemplary design, including the retention of significant heritage buildings, extensive outdoor spaces boasting 151 new trees, high level of tree retention across the site, and very low site coverage in the order of 38%. These features of the proposal should demonstrate to you that the proposal is consistent with the Boroondara planning scheme and will achieve a net community benefit. It should also be reassuring to councillors that the report that's been presented to you today is prepared and sanctioned by some of the most respected and distinguished Boroondara Council officers. We therefore encourage you to support this recommendation, which will pave a way for a new benchmark in terms of planning process, engagement with the community, design execution, amenity, and public benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll just see if there's any questions. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pearce, just one question. Some of the residents that have presented this evening have expressed concerns about the substation. Are you able to talk a little bit about why it's in the location it is? Is there some possibility that it could be relocated? And could it even be underground in the basement?
So in this case, the applicant has sought significant advice on this issue because this issue was brought to their attention in one of the objections from the neighbour directly to the south. The substation location, like the buildings on the site, like the trees being retained, like the community garden that's proposed, are all products of design principles that were established very early in the project. So the location on the site, whilst it's not the only location, only possible location, it is balancing all those different factors, the most optimal location. It is also perfectly safe and a very normal part of residential developments. It's important to note as well that there is already an existing substation on the site that services not just the site itself, but the broader community. The relocation from the central portion of the site to where it is proposed now is a product of and a need to respond to city power requirements, but also balancing tree retention and access to the site for pedestrians and things like that. So I'm not going to sit here today and say that it is the only location. Indeed, it would be far more economical for our client to have it in the location that has been suggested by one of the local residents to the north of the Port Cachere access way, because that is exactly where there is an electrical cable underneath. So my client could save some money by having it there, but it's not the most optimal location in terms of the heritage of the site, the visual impact it will have on the public realm, and it's an equally safe location to have the substation from advice that we've had from an EMF expert.
And sorry, if I could just follow up, Mr. Chair, is it possible to put the substation in the basement or does it need to be above ground?
No, because the basement is set back from all site boundaries, it is, my understanding is it's not possible to have the substation in the basement, no.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Obviously, along the northern side of Studley Road, we've got a mixture of zones, including the GRZ4. Would this have been designed differently if this site abutted another GRZ4?
I don't know if I could answer that question. I'm not really sure. What's been designed has been designed in response to the site conditions here.
Okay, so then under the GRZ4 zoning, there are some principles which need to be applied with regards to neighbourhood character and those sorts of things. And I can see that, say, Whitty House, which is your own property, has been given some grace of space between itself because that sits under a heritage overlay. Is that the case?
It has been given, in my opinion, as a town planner who works on apartment buildings on sites in a heritage overlay.
Yep.
The response there has gone above and beyond council's heritage policy. And there could be another scenario here where you have buildings sitting immediately behind, perhaps after the first 8 metres, with demolition of the rear of a building like Whitty House or Plumstead or Esmond House. What I call that is a crowding of heritage buildings. So what you see here is an incredibly sympathetic response that goes well beyond what the heritage policy expects.
So on the basis that because your client is a property owner of a heritage property, you afford the grace over and above council's position with regards to heritage. Yet I'm looking at the western boundary, which is also heritage, and have you treated that? Have you treated those two things quite dissimilarly?
Well, so the buildings that are on our side are individually significant, those that are being retained. The buildings on the western side are contributory heritage buildings. And that part of the site that's in my client's ownership isn't in the heritage overlay. How we've responded to that interface is, as Mr. Grios pointed out, through setbacks of between 7 and 13 metres, the retention of significant trees, and new built form that is not a wall of buildings, but a series of buildings with breaks between them to incorporate landscaping, and then breaks within the buildings themselves. So you'll notice on the western elevation there are some notches in the centre of those buildings, which break the buildings in two. And as Mr. Miglis pointed out earlier in his presentation, there's the adoption of the mansard roof form, which is a nod to some of those contributory buildings in Benil Avenue.
And then, as the consulting planner, should those buildings along the western boundary be lowered by 1 story, keeping the same architectural response, do you think that is a better outcome for the neighbouring properties?
Of course, lower buildings from a visual bulk and a height point of view would be a better outcome for neighbouring properties. But I never ask myself what's a better outcome. I ask myself what is an acceptable outcome. And it would be perfectly acceptable to have the buildings 5 metres closer to that boundary and lowered by 1 level. In this case, what the applicant has tried to do is take the high road and adopt superior setbacks to achieve a superior outcome. So what I'd say to that is that this is an acceptable proposal.
Okay, thanks, Chair. That concludes my questions.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Mine's not a question, but I'd like to foreshadow an adjournment motion if we've heard from all the presenters. And
okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So, councillors, are there any further questions of Mr. Pearce? Doesn't appear so. So, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Pearce.
Thank you.
Now, that exhausts our submitters because Mrs. Dross didn't attend. So I'll take, I'll take your motion to adjourn for 5 minutes, Councillor Watson, and that's seconded by Councillor Thompson. And I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. So we'll stand adjourned for 5 minutes. A motion to resume. Councillor Sinfield and seconded by Councillor Galt. No, sorry, Councillor Bigger. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. So that takes us to, we're still on item 3.3. That takes us back to Ms. Byrne for matters arising.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. There's been quite a number of submitters speak today, so I will go right back to the commencement of the item where residents in Fernhurst Grove raised the issue of concern about noise and light of vehicles exiting the Fernhurst Grove basement access ramp. I do note that the existing site has vehicle access points on Fernhurst Grove, and the existing uses on the land, or the most recently occupied uses on the land, being the school, the respite care facility, and the offices, generate a total daily traffic volume that is virtually the same as what this proposal will generate. So there is virtually no change in the traffic generation of the post-development situation compared with what has previously existed on the site, except that it will be spread more evenly throughout the day compared with the school, which has peak conflicts in the AM and PM peak hours. So from a traffic amenity perspective, the proposal is a superior or optimal outcome for the site compared with the existing conditions. With respect to concerns about overshadowing and loss of natural daylight, the proposal is entirely compliant with Res Code in respect of both of those issues. So it's fully compliant with Res Code standards for overshadowing in relation to both all of the properties in Bunul Avenue and number 1 Fernhurst Grove, and is compliant entirely in terms of the Res Code standard for natural light for both setbacks to Elphingston Grove properties, Stall Avenue properties, Bunul Road Bunul Avenue properties, excuse me, and number 1 Fernhurst Grove. With respect to concerns about the buildings which were described as monoliths and being described as looming over the heritage precinct, from Fernhurst Grove, the buildings are set back in the order of 65 to 95 metres. Perspective drawings show that they will not be visible over the top of the roof ridge of the retained heritage buildings. There will be glimpses available between the buildings, and those glimpses will be filtered through substantial retained trees, canopy trees in the order of 25 metres tall from Fernhurst Grove. From Bunul Avenue, the buildings are set back from in the order of 60 metres from the Bunul Avenue street frontage. And that perspective, that distance provides perspective that they will not loom over and above the roof ridges of the dwellings within Bunul Avenue. A number of residents have raised concerns that the architect render images are inaccurate, and they have described them as deceptive and misleading. It is my professional view that the renders provide an accurate and reasonable depiction of the proposed buildings in their context relative to existing buildings that are to be retained. That view is shared by Council's urban designer and Council's heritage advisor, each of whom have also reviewed the renders and have specifically been asked the question of whether they're of the view of their accuracy, and both have replied in the affirmative. With respect to concerns that there was not enough time to discuss the application, the statutory requirements under the Planning and Environment Act require council to give public notice of an application for a period not less than 14 days in duration. This application was advertised for a period of 4 weeks. So the statutory period was doubled. Council officers have had time to review all of the objections and have provided responses to all of the issues raised, and have taken all of those objections seriously, and given them great weight in consideration of the matters that they have raised. With respect to the substation under the planning scheme is defined as a minor utility station, a minor utility installation, the definition of which confines those types of utility installations to one that I'm not sure if it emits or utilises less than 66,000 volts. The proposed substation would have 11,000 volts, so it fully meets the definition of a minor utility installation. To be clear, no planning permit is required for the substation. Irrespective of the fact that the site is in a heritage overlay, a substation does not require planning permission. The substation as proposed could be installed on the site tomorrow without council's permission being required. That said, the plans do show the substation in a location proximate to Fernhurst Grove, and council's heritage advisor and urban designer have recommended modifications to its design, which are reflected in the recommended planning permit conditions. With respect to concerns about noise during construction, the recommended permit conditions do incorporate a requirement for a construction management plan and do set out hours of construction restrictions consistent with council's local law requirements. There's been a suggestion that council should override the zone requirements and zone and policy outcomes sought in the planning scheme. It is incumbent on council to apply the requirements of the planning scheme. They must not be disregarded. It was put by one submitter representing an objector that the applicant has put its position that the maximum 11-metre height control set out in the GRZ4 does not apply, as if there was any discretion in the matter. The planning scheme is emphatically clear. The 11-metre height limit does not apply to this proposal. And when you read council's policy for a neighbourhood character policy in respect of GRZ4 land, it explicitly supports development to occur at a greater height and density than the surrounding area. With respect to requests that the development incorporate deep soil planting, notwithstanding that it doesn't apply, Res Code standards do not apply to this development, but notwithstanding that, the proposal complies and in fact exceeds the requirements for deep soil planting areas. With respect to the impact on number 1 Fernhurst Grove, officers note that despite that property being somewhat encircled by the subject land, the interface on its long northern and southern sides remain virtually unchanged by the development. There's an existing car park to its north. There is a proposed car park to its north. Whitty House is to its south. Whitty House is to be retained to its south. On its western boundary, its short side western boundary, building B has an interface with the development with a minimum setback of 12 metres, increasing to, I think, in the order of 17 metres, with substantial and significantly large canopy trees retained around its northwestern and western edge. One of those trees is deciduous, and the officer report does set out photos of the outlook in both its leafless state and when its canopy is full, and those photos demonstrate that any views of Building B, in conjunction with its substantial setback, which exceeds Res Code requirements, will be filtered through a landscape setting. There was a quote read to councillors from the officer's report, where the officer's report indicates that the elevations, well, that the proposal, when viewed in elevation, appears stark. That is, in the officer's view, a selective quote of what the report says. And then that's quoted from page 84 of the officer's report, where the report actually goes on to say that excuse me. That in elevation form, the buildings appear stark. However, sightline diagrams demonstrate that the buildings are sufficiently set back so that they will not be visible above the roof ridge of the retained buildings. So that, and this is where the 3D renders provide are a useful tool. They're not relied on, and they're not part of the package of material that would be approved if this development is supported by council, but they do provide or act as a useful tool to inform lay people of how a building would appear when read in conjunction with when read with 2D plans. So the officer's recommendation and assessment is based on the 2D plans that are supplied. The approval documents, if the development is supported by council, will approve only the 2D plans, and the assessment set out is based on the 2D plans. But the 3D renders are just simply a useful tool to provide lay people with an understanding of how the 2D plans would appear in reality. With respect to concerns about the restriction of left in, left out vehicle movements on Studley Park Road, this is a requirement of Vic Roads. If council is of a mind to approve the development, it must include the requirements, the conditions set out by Vic Roads. There is no discretion in that area. Concern was also raised in respect of the inclusion of a cafe within Whitty House. It was described as unnecessary and suggested that residents should walk to the junction, Q Junction. There is no evidence that this cafe, which is of a modest size, will cause any detrimental impact on the economic trading or viability of Q Junction. It simply provides choice and competition within the area, which is an outcome supported by planning policy. Whitty House itself, under the heritage overlay schedule, is identified as a heritage property that is suitable for being used for a prohibited use. A cafe is not prohibited, it is a permit required, but it does set out that, or does highlight council's intention that Whitty House is suitable for alternative uses. The cafe does not open towards any residential interface. It faces towards the forecourt onto Studley Park Road, and is considered that the recommended permit conditions will adequately manage any potential offsite amenity impacts arising from the cafe use. And that's achieved through permit conditions such as restrictions to the hours of operating. And those hours of operating are consistent with council's non-residential uses policy and are in fact more restrictive than what the policy suggests can be contemplated. Just to confirm, with respect to councillors' questions about the constitution of occupants of the site, condition 9 in the recommendation compels the development to operate in compliance with the Retirement Villages Act, and the planning permit preamble describes the development as being approved as being a retirement village, not a residential apartment building, and that level of control is sufficient to ensure that that it's not an apartment building, but it would be retained and operate and function as a retirement village. Council has also asked the question of why not consider increasing the site coverage, given there's quite a disparity between what's proposed and what could be contemplated under Res Code. The primary driver of the low site coverage as proposed has been the distribution of significant trees throughout the site, which are proposed to be retained. Where possible, the buildings have been sited to minimise significant tree loss. And a question was also asked about manoeuvrability within the basement, given the age cohort. Not that I'm casting any aspersions about drivability in that age cohort, but I do note that the planning scheme design standards in respect of access aisle widths are exceeded in all access aisles. So that does provide increased manoeuvrability within the basement if there were any concerns about driverability. Thank you. Happy to take any questions. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Okay, so I have Councillor Stavrou, Councillor Addis, and then Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Ms. Byrne, just wanted to sort of unpack the retirement village concept. So just help me understand. If the identical proposal was put there in front of us, but it would have been retirement, just normal accommodation, not a retirement village, exactly the same in all other design aspects, exactly where it is, etc., would that attract a different assessment?
Yes, it would. The planning scheme controls are tailored specific to the type of use that's proposed. And so a retirement village is assessed differently to an apartment building.
I understand apartments. I'm sorry. I want to understand if it was retirement accommodation, but not to have the moniker and whatever is that difference that makes it from retirement sort of accommodation to a retirement village. I understand a village requires activities and other sorts of associated, I guess, elements to be classed as such. It's not just about the build form and who lives there over there.
A retirement village, by definition, is about the age cohort of people that reside there. And then the definition says that it can or may also include other facilities. And in fact, this proposal does include other facilities such as a library, communal gym, residence lounge, those sorts of facilities. So it is by definition a retirement village.
I understand that. I guess I'm looking at it from the other perspective. Is there any other classification relating to retirement living other than a village?
There's a, if you'll just excuse me while I look up the definition. So there's retirement village, which is currently what's proposed, and then there's retirement village, which is a different use under the planning scheme. A retirement village, the key distinction is that it's retained in one ownership. A retirement village is retained in one ownership. Retirement apartments can be sold, albeit with the restriction that they need to be sold to over 55s.
Yeah. And if we had that other version, would there be any limitation in terms of, or any change in the way that the Act or the various regulations would actually allow the design to proceed?
I will just check that as well. No, because it also is not a residential building. So it also would be permitted to have this type of building height and scale.
Yeah. Are there any other retirement accommodations at all, not classified as villages per se?
No, but there are other building types that
Yeah.
would be permitted to exceed the heights set out, the mandatory heights set out for residential buildings or apartment buildings. The 9 metre height limit only applies to dwellings and apartment buildings. Other types of buildings, so non-residential buildings, are not required to comply with that requirement in the GRZ.
There are 16 metre height levels as well, I believe, for some of the classifications.
That's for a residential aged care facility, what we used to locally call a nursing home, and that's a recommended height limit.
Okay.
Any height limit or any height control, putting aside that the 9 metre height limit does not apply in this instance. Any consideration of height in this instance on this site needs to be undertaken having regard to the full gamut of planning controls that apply to this site, and in particular, the neighbourhood character policy, which says the preferred character objective for land within the GRZ4, so land that's anomalous, land that is different to what surrounds it. The preferred character objective is to allow for development to occur at a greater height and density than the surrounding area. So that's your starting point, that it's not going to look like what's surrounding it because it's an anomalous site.
No, I understand that. That's not where I'm going. I'm going precisely to where you've just landed. So it says a greater height and greater density than the surrounding neighbourhood. I appreciate that, but it doesn't provide any guidance of how much that greater is, and both on the density and on the height side, which leads me to understand, unless there is, and I'll ask you the question there, are there any principles and guidelines of how to determine that?
Yes.
So the qualitatives, which I'll ask you afterwards.
Well, the qualitatives are the guiding principles. So the policy then sets out standards that it says that you should turn your mind to. It draws from res code, so it suggests an assessment against standard B17 side and rear setbacks, which, subject to the permit conditions, the development will fully comply with. It turns your mind to the overshadowing standard and the daylight standard, both of which, as it currently is designed, fully complies with. And it also turns your mind to the site coverage standard, which we've said is almost 50% lower than what it could otherwise be. So those qualitative standards provide some framework for council to turn its mind to whether the greater height and greater density are appropriate in this instance. There are no aspects of this proposal which would lead me to come to the conclusion that it's an overdevelopment, such as high site coverage or overshadowing or non-compliant setbacks.
Well, apart from I guess the other criteria that support the increased building heights within the site, where it can be demonstrated that the increased height will not adversely impact the precinct's preferred character. I think one can think that demonstratively concludes that it will affect the character of the neighbourhood.
Well, this is a neighbourhood character policy, and neighbourhood character is derived from its public realm interfaces. So along Fernhurst Grove, you have substantial improvements to the character of the neighbourhood, substantial improvements to the neighbourhood character, because you've got 3 heritage buildings that are being restored and will in fact improve their heritage significance from what they currently are. And then along Studley Park Road, a main road, a dual carriageway interface that is one property removed from Kew Junction, one property removed from a 7-storey commercial building, and then where it does have an interface on its public realm with a modest low-scale single dwelling at I think it's number 2 Bernal Avenue. Council's urban designer has suggested that building A should be decreased in height at its southwestern edge, and the permit conditions achieve that, and the permit applicant has indicated that they're agreeable to that permit condition. So from its interfaces, its public realm interfaces, the site is respectful of the neighbourhood character.
I guess the line of reasoning, this is what concerns me in the line of reasoning. On the one hand, we're talking about the height of the building and the bulk, and the reason that can be what it is due to the particular use. And on the other hand, we're talking about the counterpoint there is that there will be investment in restoring heritage houses, which is, I just can't see how you can balance those two, because you can still.
I might just draw that as a question, and
it's a question, yeah.
Yeah, so as we do need to keep moving along. So what's your response to that, Ms. Byrne?
Sorry, could you please rephrase or re-put the question?
Let me pull that question, Chair, and I'll ask a simple question. Ultimately, where we're going here is that it is a judgment. One has to make a judgment call rather than the actual hard and fast rules.
Yes, it's a balancing of policies, yes. All policies need to be considered and the outcome needs to be balanced against any competing objectives. But my report concludes that there are no competing objectives. All of the objectives align in this instance and lead me to come to the conclusion that the proposal is acceptable, subject to the recommended permit conditions.
And I'll ask two more questions. And my second last question is, how much higher is Building A than Vimy House or sorry, Whitty House?
Whitty House has a height of approximately 12 to 13, I think about 12.5 metres. And Building A is proposed to have a height of, it's described in the officer report, Building A has a height of 21.25 metres.
Substantially higher. And thank you for that. And just at the pleasure of my fellow councillors, would you be willing to put a condition on any approval? I'm not saying that I'm supporting it at this stage, but to remove the top level, would that be an appropriate thing?
Are you asking my opinion on that, or the councillors?
Hang on, let's just be clear. It's not a question of are you willing. I think the question perhaps ought to be what would you could seek a view. So perhaps if you could express your view.
I'm reluctant to encourage councillors to impose conditions that would dramatically change the development rather than consider it as proposed. I would think
or rejected, presumably.
I would think that would be a preferred option rather than deleting floors, particularly where you've got floors that have a particular shape and envelope. Unless you were specific about whether it's the mansard floor that's to be deleted or a mid floor, it's a very difficult thing to do on the run, and I wouldn't encourage councillors to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Byrne. Thank you, Chair.
That's it, Councillor Stavrou?
That's it with my questions.
Okay. Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Byrne. My question really is, if this were other than a retirement complex, would that alter the contemplation of the appropriate height for a GRZ4?
It has the potential. It does have the potential to. So, as I've said, an apartment building would have a different assessment requirement, and it would have a mandatory height limit of 9 metres or 10 metres on a site like this because of its sloping site. But there are other uses that could be contemplated that wouldn't have a height limit apply, largely non-residential uses. So the height restriction is not applied across the board, and retirement village is not the only exception to the height requirement.
Thank you. And just one more question. I'm assuming that the overlooking issue has been addressed in conditions, or you've assessed it as not being an issue for the local residents from this proposal?
I've assessed it as being acceptable, yes.
Okay, I think that's it. Thanks very much, Chair, for me.
Thank you. Before I move to the next question, Ms. Byrne, just in respect of Councillor Addis's first question, I'm not sure that I entirely followed that. Could you give an example of a use for this particular land that could be, seeing buildings at 21 metres and above?
Look, it's not a realistic example, but a non-resident, one that I can think of off the top of my head, a cafe is a Section 2 use. It's a non-residential use. You could conceivably build a 6-storey cafe on the land. Clearly, that's an absurdity and wouldn't be proposed, but non-residential uses are not subject to the 9 metre height limit. And there is a small framework or a small range of Section 2 uses of permit required uses that are non-residential that can be contemplated within residentially zoned land, such as a cafe. All
right. So if we avoid the absurdity, and given that that was your example, can one infer that for all intents and purposes, nothing other than a retirement village is going to get anywhere near 21 metres on this site?
None come to mind.
Okay, thank you. The next councillor I had was Councillor Goltz.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Byrne, some of the presenters tonight pointed out their concern about the accuracy of some of the architectural renderings. Have you been able to ascertain, or do you have an opinion on the accuracy of those renderings, particularly the ones where they attempted to show what the development would look like from adjoining streets, particularly the streets to the west, I would think?
Yes, due to the concept of perspective, here they are.
You're breaking up, Ms. Byrne. Could we start that again, please?
How's that?
That's good.
Thank you. Due to the benefits of perspective, the further away an object is from the point of view, the smaller it will appear. So comparing that, this is why in the officer's report I say that the 2D streetscape elevations appear to show a stark difference in height between, say, the Benool Avenue properties and the proposed buildings behind it, because 2D plans do not provide the benefit of perspective and depth, whereas the 3D architect's renders do. It's my professional opinion that they're accurate, and that is based on viewing of the sightline diagrams that are provided in 2D form with the application. So those 2D sightline diagrams verify that, that the perspective drawings are accurate.
Are you, through your chair again, can I ask a couple of other quick questions?
Sure.
Are you aware there was any attempt to have a discussion along those lines with adjoining residents to work through those that sort of point?
The point about the accuracy of the drawings?
Oh, the point about foreshortening and the effect of setbacks and the appearance of the buildings from the adjoining buildings.
I've personally had conversations with at least 2 to 3 objectors about that issue during the course of public notice when the matter was raised with me over the phone, and I've addressed it in the officer's report also. So when it's been raised directly with me, yes, I've had that conversation. It's also my understanding that the point was raised directly with the permit applicant during their information sessions, and it's my understanding that the permit applicant has attempted to engage with residents on that issue as well to provide them with some comfort. Although it seems it may not have provided the comfort sought.
Thank you very much. Just the final question would be, when thinking about how the buildings might appear, particularly from the residences to the west, I immediately looked at the planting plans proposed, and maybe I didn't look hard enough, but I couldn't see an indication of the sort of height of trees proposed along the boundary with the adjoining dwellings. Was there any proposals relating to the height of trees?
Proposal does contemplate trees that will reach a maturity of between 12 to 15 metres along the western boundary, interspersed with the large canopy tree that's to be retained, that's already in the order of, I think, 20 metres tall.
Mm. And would that in effect have some beneficial effect on the potential feeling of being overlooked, I suspect, from the adjoining dwellings?
Yes, it would, and it would filter it in terms of provide a filtering or softening effect from a visual bulk perspective as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think Councillor Hollingsworth. Are there any others after Councillor Hollingsworth? Excellent.
Thank you,
Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Byrne, for clarifying all that you've done. With the rooftop plant and equipment, I presume there would be another metre, for example, of some sort of concealment to remove the visual view of plant and equipment? Not that you would see much from 21 metres from ground level anyway, but is that your understanding, that there's some sort of a parapet around plant and equipment to conceal it?
No, it's actually hidden within the mansard roof form. So
it's actually
the architect has integrated the plant and equipment screen as part of the roof. So,
wonderful.
So it's not a separate screen.
Right, thank you. And just one more point of clarification. Is it your understanding there's no air conditioning units or utility units on balconies?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, thank you.
So I think that's exhausted our questions. I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the many years of service of Ms. Byrne. You've been with the City of Boroondara for many, many years, and you've finished. So good luck in the next phase of your career, and certainly we acknowledge your significant service to council during the time you were here.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, councillors, Councillor Stavrou foreshadowed a motion, and I propose to hear that motion now.
Thank you, Chair. What I have prepared is an alternate motion of refusal, which I would like that the officers have prepared for me previously and would like to.
Okay, we'll just bring that up on the screen. Okay, so can we scroll to the numbered paragraphs? Oh, this is the, yeah. So are we able to just scroll that up or not?
You can scroll manually, I believe.
Yeah, I get told that, but I never can. Can the public view that? If they move their screens up and down. Okay, council. All right, so I'll well, we'll take that down and we'll just assume that that's been read, unless councillors need any more time with it. Councillor Gillies.
Chair, can I just clarify, please? That was titled Officer Recommendation, whereas I believe Councillor Stavro is proposing an alternative to the officer's recommendation.
Notwithstanding that labelling, that was Councillor Stavro's motion. It is a motion of refusal. So that labelling, I'm not sure where that crept in, but it is the refusal motion.
Okay,
and
just
that has
so
been
observers understand that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, councillors, did everybody see that motion, or do you need it for a further period?
It was circulated ahead of time.
Yep, that's fine. So I'm in search of a seconder. Councillor Hollingsworth. To assist, no, you want to speak?
Thank you, Councillor Park. I was just going to say I'm seconding this to enable debate.
Yep, okay, thank you. All right, so there, to assist Councillor Stavro, is there opposition? There is some opposition. So, Councillor Stavro, I'll move to you.
Thank you, Chair. And let me start first by thanking the officers for what would have been an enormous amount of work. Clearly, a very complex development. Also, want to thank all the presenters tonight for their presentation to us, and it includes the Villa Maria Catholic Homes for their representatives who undoubtedly are putting forward an extremely luxuriously appointed proposal and really recognise their effort, which makes it all the more difficult. It is a contemporary design, and on a standalone basis, it appears to be a quality architectural statement. But even though this proposal would have wonderful amenity for future retirees and spectacular views, I would imagine, for some, I do believe that the proposal is not right for our community due to its excessive built bulk. Our community, as you heard, is not opposed to developing much needed retirement housing, but it is opposed to proposing a building scale of this size in its midst. Councillors, this GRZ4 site sits in an anomaly within the well-established NRZ zone, both in the hinterland and westwards on Studley Park Road, all the way to Yarra Bend. The proposed site zoning is an island that needs an approach that's more sensitive in its development than it currently is. And I am talking about only the build form, not the uses. And given the magnitude and far-reaching ramifications for the neighbourhood, as we see the 5-storey height, I know people spoke of fixation, but it is a large bulk compared to anything else in the neighbourhood. As we heard from the community and its feelings about consultation, it doesn't feel that it has been as extensive, at least from the feedback that I have been receiving. And we see there were over 80 objectives. And with COVID in the midst, I think it's extraordinary to think that that on top of all this, the community will get a decision like this right now without the consultation to have adopted a few more of their feedback. But the decision tonight is not really about this or that technicality. I think that's clear. I think our officers do fantastic work, so it's not about that. I've done a lot of work in checking this, and while some issues may remain unresolved in the community's eyes, I'd like to focus elsewhere as foreshadowed above. The decision tonight is really about inappropriate bulk and how much of that do we allow in our community. And this bulk that will have a very negative effect on the character of the neighbourhood. It's not just me saying that. Our community has been in large numbers saying that. This includes the diminishing of the heritage buildings and that of Barry Street nearby, notwithstanding the restoration inputs, which are very welcome. While planning expertise is hugely important to consult, this decision ultimately has to be right for the local community. Because if inappropriate buildings go up, they will be there for the rest of our lives and the rest of our children's lives. Even if we consider the site's GIZ4 zoning and allowance for greater height and greater density, these criteria are not prescriptive. They require judgment. How much more density and how much more height do we think is appropriate? This judgment has to be in line with the community character and expectations. This is why the residents of Boroondara vote for their councillors. It should be us. Let me reiterate that our community will have to live with these buildings dominating the local build form, and I would implore Villa Maria Catholic Homes to seek an outcome more sensitive to the community. There are ways. Just on a couple of issues that I will touch. I don't prepare to dwell long on them because a lot of it is said about heritage and planning. But when it comes to heritage, for example, the repurposing and restoring does much to preserve the buildings. And for this, I do applaud the effort. But the bulk of the proposal will only detract from heritage as it seeks to restore. I think we've said how contrasting Whitty House versus the 5-story next to it will be, and never in any of the pictures had I seen them together side by side in any of the renderings, drawn or actual architectural with much more refined lines. I don't want to list all the other parts of the bulk, but there are, for example, key issues with number 1 Fernhurst Grove, where that family is going to not only have the 5-story height, but on an increased curvature where the land sort of backs up and gives it a much bigger visual footprint. I think that's a key thing to remember as well. We as councillors have a duty to our community, and the only tools we effectively, unfortunately, have is to decline this proposal. Personally, I have struggled with this. I have read it and reread the proposal, and to ensure that I'm not missing anything, because I understand the effort and I do understand the hard work that's been put in by everybody. I've also conferred with the community many times, and I've heard their pain, their hurt at the same time, and participated in developer presentations and many discussions with the officers and fellow councillors to get my ideas settled and make sure that I wasn't being unfair on any side.
Need you to start to wrap up, Councillor Stavro.
I've only got three more bullet points. I am opposing this application tonight because I have formed the view that this decision is not black and white. It is a decision that requires judgment, and we should be making this judgment. In a critical way, I feel that I'm in really good company when I think of the local community and the local aspects there, because that's exactly what Catholic social teachings would tell you as well. They've championed it for years, if not centuries, that there's a principle there, the principle of subsidiarity. And in subsidiarity, it says that all people have the right to participate in decisions that affect their lives. Subsidiarity requires that decisions are made by the people closest and most affected by the issues and concerns of the community. Taking account of subsidiarity will mean that we must work in partnership with local communities and groups with an attitude of humility. Local groups have important insight in what is best for their communities. They need to have a say and to influence the outcome. As I implore my fellow councillors to support the alternative motion and also turn to Villa Maria Catholic Homes and ask of you to be true to your principles and engage with the community to lead to an outcome that is more appropriate. Thank you, councillors.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be opposing this motion tonight. Councillor Stavro posed the question, how much do we allow, and in reference to the bulk and the height? I think that ascribes us to have far more power than we actually have. And when Ms. Byrne was making her remarks, she mentioned that it is incumbent upon council to apply the requirements of the zone. Now, I know there's certainly been a lot of talk tonight about, well, what if it was an apartment building versus the retirement home? And the point is it is a retirement establishment, and it does have differences, a different lens applied to it and different controls. So we could apply that argument ad nauseum. What if it was this or what if it was that? The point is, it's a retirement home. It fully complies, and I urge my fellow councillors to reject the motion before you tonight, and will foreshadow, should this motion fail, to move the officer's recommendation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. And I certainly understand the sentiment of the ward councillor here, because his motion there serves to serve his community best, his residents best. And I think that's the challenge for all of us with this one. But having listened to and asked a number of questions with regards to this application, there are a number of things that stand out for me. And that is the fact that, well, I'll start by saying the design is quite lovely. It's actually a really good response. It's a green garden-led design. I'm disappointed with Villa Maria Holmes's responses. I'm disappointed with their ability to reflect on what the community sentiment is. And what was a telltale sign for me was the fact that they were so resistant to actually make some minor amendments to this application that they would probably take any refusal off to VCAT. And the chances of a worst outcome for our community is clear and apparent, because the officer's recommendation actually supports a much better outcome than what the application actually is. And the applicant has actually agreed to accept in full all of the conditions that are in the officer's report. This may seem like a false economy in some respects, but this is actually the best outcome. The officer's report, with the conditions openly accepted by the applicant, is actually going to be the very best outcome for this project on this site. And that is as a result of the anomaly that is the GRZ4 butting up against a NRZ3. But that is what we're dealing with. It will be won at VCAT, and we will see this application with no conditions applied to it built. So I've got to look at it at a slightly different lens with the same view to protect the residents and the best outcome possible. And I've got to support the officer's recommendation should this motion fail. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you. There's a lot that is to be admired in relation to this proposed development. It really is an exemplary design. The overwhelming garden nature of the setting, I think, 54% garden area. The nature of the design of the individual apartments, with almost 50% of them, I think, being north facing, a very large number having dual aspects. These things may appear small, but they're very, very significant in terms of the long-term quality of the development that we can achieve and have in Boroondara, and that actually strengthens our community. The environmental benefits of the cross-flow ventilation, the lack of the removal of gas entirely, the 7-star rating of the buildings. We can go on and on. There is genuinely a lot to love about this development. The heritage restoration of the significant sites, the generous setbacks, etc., etc. There is one concern that's come up repeatedly that's strong from our residential community, and that's the issue of the height. And we've gone over and over this issue, and I hear that, I understand that, but it does comply. It is within the the parameters for approval. There's nothing on which we can refuse it. I really want to make this point. I think it's easy if we say, and for the residents who are listening, we could turn around and say, oh, let's refuse this, but are you going to be better off? Or are you really going to be better off? What's going to happen then is the developer will take this and go to VCAT and get approved the original design. The alternative is you'll get the additional gains that the officers have negotiated. It's very difficult. Sometimes as councillors, we get up, we got 80 residents or whatever, objecting, saying, look, do this, reject it, refuse it. But actually, think about it long term. Are you going to get something better or something worse? And I fall with the Mayor and with Councillor Watson on this. You're actually going to be better off if we approve the officer's recommendation. And I also want to make a point about just some of the processes that are really significant. I mean, we've got good architects working on this. We have an architectural competition. I just want to make this point. We overlook the client, the developer, actually went out to an architectural competition, not just to anybody, but 3 top-tier firms. I mean, this is the way we should be going about development. I mean, on a personal basis, I was involved in introducing mandatory architectural competitions in the City of Sydney in my previous career, and it's one of the significant gains that I think I contributed to in that part of my life, and I just welcome that so much. And you can see the benefit of that, of the architectural and the design quality of what we're achieving here. And it just concerns me that I understand, yes, it's higher, but there is a reason for that height. And we're also trading off open space. It's not just bulk. Bulk is...
Need you to wrap up, Councillor Franco.
I'll wrap up on this point. Bulk is not just height. It's height within the context, and very significant thought has gone into breaking up the massing and opening up the garden setting. And I think it's to be commended from that aspect. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Addis and then Councillor Galt.
Thanks very much, Chair. And look, just very briefly, I don't support Councillor Stavr's motion. I'd like to start with thanking Ms. Byrne for the absolutely excellent report and all the work that's gone into this. We will really miss you, and thank you for your service. I'd also I'd like to commend Councillor Stavro for doing his very best to stand up for his community and achieve as much as he possibly can. And I do fully commend you for what you're doing, even though I don't actually support it. But, good on you for standing up for your community. And I won't go over all the other things that everyone said, but I think for me, it is a balancing act. And yes, we have the power to refuse applications, but we don't actually have the power to sustain those refusals. And like the others say, I'm concerned if we refuse this, we'll actually end up with something that's not as good as what we see on the table now. So I think I'd rather accept this and achieve what I believe is the best we can for the community. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I won't repeat what's been said before. I broadly agree with what Councillor Thompson said and Councillor Addis. I do support those comments quite strongly. It's been difficult thinking through this. If I were any of those residents thinking about a large building going up behind me, I'd be fighting tooth and nail as well. But unfortunately, the zoning is what the zoning is. So I won't repeat those comments, but I just say that one of the things I really liked about the officer's recommendations, and I think we need to consider it for an awful lot more projects, and I've been involved with a number of quite distressed projects in recent years, is you have written in that you must keep the original architect through the design development and through construction to ensure that the excellent portions of this design are delivered. And from memory, the same thing has been said about the heritage architect, and I think that's to be commended and considered in other recommendations from the officers. Just a final point to end on. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also particularly want to thank Ms. Byrne and also add to the fact that while we thank her, we're also slightly annoyed that she's left. So she will be very much missed. And I found this a very challenging matter to look at, and I have a lot of the same feelings of what's been mentioned so far. I will support Councillor Stavro in the end, because I think that ultimately I am frustrated by the by what I see as the lack of responsiveness on the height. I think it is it's a significant issue, particularly for those neighbours on Baniel Street. I think it's completely overwhelming, and I guess this is in part maybe because just recently, quite recently in my own ward, we spoke very strongly about sort of overdevelopment that we had no control over when the state was putting a very big development on us. And from my perspective, it feels, you know, I said at the time, if given the opportunity to say no to something like, you know, of such size over the neighbours, I would say no to it. And so my fellow councillors may prove us wrong that this might go on to VCAT and we might lose, but I guess I have to stand on what I think is the principle of this, and so I will give my support to Councillor Stavro. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I also echo many of the comments and thank Ms. Byrne for her utmost professionalism, and I think it's arguably second to none of the excellent staff that we have at the City of Burundara, and I wish you all the best. I'd also like to acknowledge the neighbours, and you know, I really do empathise with you. It's an awful position to be in, to have such a huge development going on. But I do think that you know, I'm actually really quite torn with this. Villa Maria Catholic Homes have presented, I think, what really is a lovely village style development in many aspects, with the exception of the height. And I and many others struggle with that component of it. But I think Ms. Byrne has done a fantastic job in trying to find the best outcome over, I'm sure, what has been many months, if not years, of discussions and negotiations with the developer here to try and achieve something that is about the best as you can get in this type of zoning. So it's really tricky. There's a lot to like about the proposal. As I said, the village style, the restoration of the beautiful buildings, I think, which will be a great asset to the community. Retention of many trees, I think, is a great outcome. And providing aged care accommodation in a retirement village setting close to Kew Junction with public transport, I think, is also going to benefit our community longer term. But I do think that it is too big and too tall and too imposing. And I'm still scarred from the development in Cecil Street and Downton Grove in Kew, where a large 80-bed aged care facility went in there, and it's most certainly imposing for the local residential hinterland there. So I come to a position where I think that saying no tonight actually shirks our responsibility on this, because it will be approved at VCAT, and I think that will give the neighbours false hope, unfortunately. But that's the reality of it, and I think Ms. Byrne's done a great job in getting the development to this position, because I think it really could be a lot worse. So I would encourage the developers to really take on board the feedback and to work with the neighbours over the months and years ahead, as this will likely proceed. So I'm sorry, Councillor Stavro, but I can't support this. but I do applaud your efforts to support your community here.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? No. Then I'll express my view. I am gravely disappointed that the applicant has failed to be a good corporate citizen, and I think that the sheer arrogance about this is what we're going to do, that they're in a perfect position to actually listen to the community and take on board the feedback, and chose not to come here tonight and suggest that this development proposal is immersed in the landscape. That I've never heard. I mean, that's just absurd, absolutely absurd. Anything but immersed in the landscape. I disagree with what the Mayor had to say, because I heard something very different from the applicant's representative. The suggestion that was put by the Mayor was that the applicant had agreed to accept in full the officer's recommendation. No, that's not what was said, and they were quite equivocal on that point, that they were still working through them, and so that's anything but an agreement to accept the recommendations in full, or indeed even in part. It was also suggested by the Mayor that if it went to VCAT, that no conditions would be applied. Well, clearly that's wrong. Clearly conditions will be applied. And if it went to VCAT, it would be up to Council's representatives to argue the case. I find the bases for refusal that have been advanced in the motion to be compelling and accurate. And quite frankly, I'm astonished that so many councillors think that they can predict what VCAT might do. At the best of times, it's a thoroughly unpredictable beast. So I'm not sure how we come to all know what VCAT would or wouldn't make of it. But in any event, I'm happy to join you in the trenches, Councillor Stavru, and fight for what's right, because I think that this development, which certainly has some redeeming features, but you know, what developments don't? I mean, it's arguably superior to a 6-storey cafe, but it's not going to immerse in that landscape at all. It'll be a blight on the landscape, and I think I would urge a rethink by the developer. Actually demonstrate that you're willing to be a good corporate citizen and do better, and most importantly, like this council, will listen to the residents. So if there's no further speakers, I'll return to Councillor Stavru.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm not going to go over the ground of what I originally spoke in support of my motion, because I too recognise the quality of the proposal. What I'm clearly saying is, it's notwithstanding Councillor Watson's zones and what's allowed, I can't think that a same kind of structure with the same kind of zoning, with the same kind of shape of the envelope in another completely different municipality with different neighbourhoods would ultimately lead to the same conclusion. Just because it's allowed, it doesn't mean it can go up to that level. It's the minimum standard. It's not telling us it's a mandatory standard. So I don't agree with that. 7-star rating for the building is fantastic, and it's something that to be commended. But I don't think it's the right thing to sort of push the building structure and bulk to that community, because in the end of the day, I'm sure standards are going to change and they're going to be tighter, and most buildings will need to increase their their standards. It's a question about the actual build bulk and what that is going to do to the community and how it will change its profile. I think Councillor Park said it about VCAT. VCAT might decide in the way that my fellow councillors are saying it will, but if it doesn't go there, we will never know. So it will become a really moot point, and the community might never know as well. Look, architectural competition is a great thing, and I do agree with Councillor Franco, and that has the ability to improve things. But as we've seen with Melbourne City Council deciding that a lot of what it's very competitively sought after building of some of those buildings has turned out to an architectural profile that they pejoratively called with a word that shall not be named here tonight. So I just think that in simple terms, that particular bulk, trying to sort of hide it in that area is not the right thing. So I'll leave it at that. Thank both the councillors that supported me and also everybody that spoke against you. You know, I'm sure you're doing it what's best for the community as well.
Okay, so councillors, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? 6 on the narrowest of margins. That motion is lost. So Councillor Watson, you foreshadowed a motion.
I did, thank you, Chair. I foreshadowed that I would like to move the officer's recommendation. And
is there a seconder? Councillor Thompson. There is opposition to that. So, but nonetheless, I would urge constraints with councillors. We've had the debate, but Councillor Watson, if you'd like to speak to your motion.
I'll speak very briefly. I propose the officer's recommendation. I think that Ms. Byrne and her team have done an outstanding job with getting amendments that will satisfy many of the concerns and achieve a better outcome for the community. So I commend the motion to my fellow councillors.
Are there any other speakers, or can I put the motion? I'm going to put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? 5. That motion is carried. Thank you. So that takes us to item 4, general business. Are there any items of general business? Item 5, urgent business. Item 6, confidential business. And that concludes our business, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.